Good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is a special meeting on December 4th, 2024, a public hearing of the Land Use Commission. The City Code directs this body to hear applications for map and text amendments, special uses including plan developments, zoning relief, and appeals from decisions of the zoning administrator, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term planning goals and objectives. Depending on the type of matter, this commission will either make a final determination or send its recommendation to City Council. Ms. Jones, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Aravallo? Commissioner Halleck? Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Linwall? Commissioner Mabadi?
Here.
Commissioner Mangum? Commissioner Madinchev?
Here.
Commissioner Puctel? Chair Rogers?
Here. With 6 members present, we do have a quorum. Also, Commissioner Puctel is expected to join us in a little bit. Also present from city staff tonight are Neighborhood and Land Use Planner Megan Jones, Planning Manager Liz Williams, Interim Zoning Administrator Sam Hubbard, Community Development Director Sarah Flax, and Corporation Counsel Alex Ruggie. Our hearings for the proposed comprehensive general plan and zoning ordinance will vary slightly from our regular meeting structure. We will hold 6 hearings for the purpose of receiving testimony from the public and providing direction and input from the commissioners on these important documents. At each meeting, we will have a presentation from staff followed by up to 3 hours of public testimony, concluding with comments by commissioners. We've already covered off at our last meeting on the comprehensive general plan. Tonight, we'll be discussing Chapter 3, which is zoning districts and maps. Next week will be Chapter 1, definitions, Chapter 2, general provisions, and Chapter 7, procedures and administration. And on our meeting on the 18th, we will discuss Chapter 4, which will include use regulations, Chapter 5, which will cover development standards, and Chapter 6, which will include discussion on non-conforming uses and structures. On January 8th, we will address any continuances, as well as providing commissioner input if there is time permitting. And then we will begin our deliberation and make our recommendation to City Council through a vote on January 15th. At that meeting, we will propose amendments, deliberate, and then make that recommendation to Council. This is a formal hearing, and there are rules that govern our proceedings. Most importantly, only one person speaks at a time so that all testimony may be accurately recorded. Anyone who wishes to address the Commission regarding any matter on tonight's agenda will have the opportunity to do so at the appropriate time. The chair will determine the time allotted for each speaker based on the number of speakers who have signed up. Any resident may present evidence, reasonably question witnesses, or seek a continuance of the hearing. When testifying, please make sure to state your name and address for the record and sign in on the provided sign-up sheet. All testimony is taken under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence, please limit your testimony to the proposal as it relates to the standards contained in the zoning ordinance and the corresponding staff memo. Our meetings are audio and video recorded. Please make sure that you are at a microphone when asking questions or making statements so that you can be properly recorded. All proceedings are subject to broadcast at a later date. We do have 2 items on the agenda this evening, but we will be hearing them basically as one because they overlap. One is the text amendment portion that we've started, and also then the map, which was also sent out. These were placed on the Envision Evanston 2045 website about 2 weeks ago. And so they have been out in the public, and I know there have been at least one town hall already last night. So these documents have been made available to the public. Before we begin, is Mr. Jeff Smith in the room? I've seen him around. I think he may be upstairs. Okay. Can you ask him to come down for a moment? While we're doing that, has everyone who wanted to sign up to speak to us had the opportunity to sign in on the sign-up sheet? If you want to come up right now, please, and put your name and address on the sign-up sheet so I know how many speakers we'll have this evening. If you signed up online, I have your names already. I've got 10 names that signed up online, but if you have not signed up online or in person and want to speak this evening, please just sign in here.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned to you, I have 3 letters that I received that I'd like to pass out to the commissioners and copy to staff.
Okay.
I'll do that now.
Yep, that's fine. As a reminder, all communications relating to anything having to do with the Land Use Commission should be directed to staff, not to us individually, because it's unfair if one of us has information that none of the other commissioners have. So if you give it to staff, it will be distributed to all the commissioners at the same time.
Max is coming.
Yeah, I'll keep it with her.
Let me sure. I think I have.
Yeah, make sure you got it.
On my list here.
Thank you. Sure, I would. Give me officially.
All right. Good evening, Mr. Smith.
You rang?
Yes. You had filed a letter, you'd sent a letter earlier today about the proceedings, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to address that real quickly and then have council respond to you on that.
Okay.
So if you want to take just a few minutes and kind of state what your position is, and then I'll let council respond.
Sure. And this is a procedural objection only, so I'm reserving comment on the substance of any agenda item. The notice for tonight's hearing indicated only that the map amendment would be discussed, at least the notice that I got. And you can't discuss a map that refers to categories of zoning districts that don't exist. Someone in the city must have realized this, because the text amendment for the districts was then put on the agenda for tonight as the first item. But the text amendment was not noticed for tonight in the public notice. In the tiniest font I've ever seen, it says that the text amendment will be discussed at the next two meetings in December. The notice itself didn't direct anybody in the city to any actual documents, only to a website where you have to go on a scavenger hunt, and you have to have 4 documents open, 2 maps and 2 zoning codes, including one on a separate website, the Municode website, to figure out what's being proposed for even one property. Only the most persistent people can wade through that. So I don't think it was real notice. And if you're trying to comment on something that covers hundreds of properties in the city, it's a daunting process. So there's other problems with the process, like only allowing 3 minutes or less for testimony when a person's home, and for most people, their home is their primary asset, and they're maybe counting on it for their retirement, is at stake. It's not the whole truth if you're limited to a couple minutes. But the biggest problem is this: when this commission considers zoning, it does so with respect to a plan. But the new map doesn't jive with the existing plan, and it isn't meant to. So you're being asked to evaluate zoning with respect to a plan that not only hasn't been adopted, but it isn't even to the second draft stage. So you're being asked to work on something with respect to a moving target. And that's a good reason why municipalities don't normally do a plan and zoning at the same time. It's guaranteed not to produce the best product that a community is capable of. So what we're seeing, I think, is not really planning, this thing that's being whipped along. It's more like a cross between lobbying or a last-minute legislative rush in Springfield or just plain bullying. And it's not just unfair to the public, it's unfair to you as volunteers. It's not the best use of your time. You didn't draft this, but you have to sit here and deal with the emotion of folks who are behind the 8 ball on this rushing train. So if I were on this commission, I would make a motion, and I would vote for it, to defer all consideration of any zoning until after we have a comprehensive plan that's both been adopted by the council and at least implicitly, if not explicitly, approved by the voters at the April election. I would defer any further meetings on the comprehensive plan itself until after the new year and wish my colleagues and everyone in this room happy holidays.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. All right, thank you. Ms. Ruggie, would you like to respond to that, please?
Yes, good evening, Chair Rogers, members of the Land Use Commission. My name is Alex Ruggie. I'm the city's corporation counsel. I'll respond to the legal aspects of Mr. Smith's arguments. Looking at City Code 6346, and it discussed the procedure for review and decision of proposed amendments. It only requires a postcard notice for map amendments. The city code does not require a postcard for text amendments. So that's why only the map amendment was included in the postcard. If you notice, the legal notice that went out in the newspaper that's required by law, it contained both the text and the map amendment. So it was all legally correct. So the proper notice did go out. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I say I've spent at least a half an hour now, if not an hour, looking all over the internet trying to find that legal notice. Most people don't get a print newspaper anymore. And if you go to the Chicago Tribune.com website, you can't find it through a normal search. You can't find it through a Google search. So, and there's complying with the bare minimum of the law. But when we're redoing the entirety of Evanston, I think we should be bending over backwards to create consensus and build public trust.
Please, you're only delaying things by clapping. I know most of you support this, and we'll hear from public later on that, but I'm going to ask you please to be respectful. At this point, legal counsel has said what they have to say. I'm at the direction of legal counsel on this. And so we will proceed with the meeting this evening as it was noticed and as it is being presented. And I know you've signed up to speak later as well, so I'll call you back.
No, that's really that's the only thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to know, based on Mr. Smith's comment, I'd like to know if it's the appropriate time for us, one of us, if we choose, to make a motion to delay the vote on the zoning until the comprehensive plan is approved. I would like that qualify that. I would like to hear everybody's comments, whether it's on zoning or whether it's on the comp plan tonight. But our vote.
So we will be taking a vote in January. We're not voting on anything until January. I understand your point, and I get your point.
Yeah.
But until we're actually voting on something, we've had a lot of people who have shown up to speak. We've announced things. I would like to get public testimony in.
Right.
And then when it comes time for us to vote, we can address any of those issues.
The point is that, and I know the meeting, the agenda for the meetings have been set, and they're primarily to address zoning, but without a comprehensive plan that we have all agreed to and the council has agreed to, how can we vote? Comprehensive plan is about setting the goals. When we reviewed that comprehensive plan, we all had comments. We had, some significant comments about what was lacking in the comprehensive plan, what wasn't addressed correctly, a lot of issues. And yet we're moving on zoning, which is supposed to be based on the goals set in the comprehensive plan. It makes no sense. It makes no sense to me. And so what I'm asking about is, can we, notwithstanding this meeting, to hear the people that have already come, to say our future meetings should address the comments that we've made on the comprehensive plan, which we haven't gotten back yet.
Right.
Instead of jumping to zoning and then jumping back on the goals and jumping back. I mean, it's just insane. And that would be my motion to do that.
There is a motion that's been made. So I will ask if there is a second. Yes.
Can you just restate the motion?
My motion is that after this meeting, that we would focus on the comprehensive plan and not the zoning, and eventually vote on that comprehensive plan before we take up the zoning. It's backwards right now, it seems to me. So that would be my motion. Is that clear or not? Okay.
Is there a second? I second it. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I will just say that I agree with you. We have kind of adopted an agenda and a plan based on what the elected officials have directed us to do. We are somewhat at their call.
The elected officials are elected by the residents of the city,
They are.
correct?
Yes, yes.
So they're representing,
They are.
okay.
I get it, George. I get it. So the motion that is before us now is to continue with tonight's meeting and then return at our next meeting with a focus on the comprehensive general plan, as I'm understanding your motion correctly.
Correct.
All right. Does staff want to make any comments, anything from legal on that? Okay.
And let me just to say that I understood that we all got the schedule, and frankly, in the very beginning of this, when we talked about process, there were comments about why are we doing this together. But I think none of us really understood the implications of doing both these processes together and sometimes backwards. So we're all learning. These people out here are all learning, and I think we're realizing that we all want this to come out the best way that it can be, and we're realizing that there's problems with that process.
All right.
May I add something to this?
Yes.
I think that's absolutely right, and I will support this. I would say that on the same note, I tried for the time that I had the zoning amendments, I tried to go through all the districts and find discrepancies or things that could be improved. It took me significant time. I don't think that in this time that we scheduled originally, we can fit that. I simply don't think. Time will not be enough if we want to be serious with this thing.
Yes, Commissioner Mangum. Try again.
Okay, I'll
There.
try another one. I would say I agree with him. I think we are moving way too quickly with this document or documents. We need to be very careful because once we approve or agree to certain changes, you can't really, once you ring the bell, you can't unring it. And I think we need to take our time and make sure we're going through these carefully, slowly, so that we can do what's best for the community.
All right. Commissioner, before I go to you, Commissioner, I do want to note that Commissioner Puchtel has joined us on the dais.
Should I restate the motion for?
I'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to. Before I go to you, I've got a question from legal counsel.
Thank you, Chair Rogers. The question is for staff. Would we keep the same meeting schedule going forward, the 18th, the 11th, and then into January, or would we go back to the normal land use schedule?
No, I think we still would go with our schedule as
Thank
we've
you.
established it with the extra meetings.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mabadi.
Can you
Actually,
can you clarify? I'm confused. Are we keeping the 11th for the text amendments, or what are we doing with the 11th and the 18th then? Because the comprehensive plan has been continued to the January 8th.
So
If this is the direction of the commission, my suggestion would be that the motion be amended to continue all of the scheduled hearings on the text amendments, the 11th and the 18th. Because it does impact, and we do need to come back probably formally, Corp Council, to actually continue those hearings on those dates as well.
But that's the whole point. The point is that we're talking about a text amendment to a zoning code when we don't even have a comprehensive plan.
I understand. I'm just talking about procedurally, how are we handling the 11th and the 18th? How does the commission want to handle that? And
But
I think legally, the commission will still have to hold the meeting on the 11th to make the same motion that you're making this evening. Is that correct, Corp Counsel?
That's correct because it's already been legally noticed.
Okay, then that's fine. What I'm suggesting, though, for an agenda is that the next two meetings are about the comprehensive plan, and
We would not have enough time to legally notice those two meetings. It requires notice in the paper to discuss the comprehensive plan, and it has to be 15 days prior to the notice.
well, then that's what we do.
Correct. The comprehensive plan has already been continued to January 8th by the commission, so that is the next available date for you to discuss the comprehensive plan.
Can we move that date to the soonest date that the staff would be ready and it could be noticed?
I believe that is the earliest date that staff would be ready and that it could be legally noticed. And it does not need to be legally noticed because it's been continued to a date certain by the commission at your November 20th hearing.
Listen, I'm okay with this because I think the general feeling in the room, and I think the general feeling in the community, the people that I've talked to, all say that this is moving too fast. And my point specifically is that the cart is before the horse. We're looking at zoning issues and we don't even have a comprehensive plan. And there are so many issues that we raised here about the comprehensive plan. So if we're not ready and it's not possible to review the comprehensive plan sooner than January 8th, then that's my part of my motion.
Yeah, great. Yep.
That's fine. Thank you. We just wanted to clarify.
But that would
We were
preclude-
just clarifying.
That would say that in the next two meetings, we're not talking about zoning.
Well, we wouldn't have the next two meetings then because
We wouldn't
don't-
have the next two
We
meetings.
don't have anything else
The
to
next,
discuss.
the next meeting would be January 8th.
Right.
Well, we'll have to have the December 11th to continue the matter.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. I think part, and sort of emotionally part of this is that what's very peculiar about this is that this intense period is happening over the holidays. And people just aren't around. And do we want participation or do we don't want participation? Because I'll tell you, if we don't want resident participation, this is a perfect time to do that. If we don't, so I think we do. So this is part of my proposal to.
So I think in wrapping into that then is staff will have to meet with me probably and Corporation Counsel so we can establish a new calendar based off of whatever the outcome of this vote is. If this vote passes, then we have to figure out how we move forward from January 8th. If this motion fails, then we move ahead, but we will go ahead and hear the people who have come tonight to speak.
Yep.
So that testimony will be recorded. So Commissioner Puchtel, just to bring you up to speed a little bit here, you've walked into the middle of this.
I was watching the recording.
Oh, okay. So you've heard Commissioner Halleck's original motion and understand what we've been discussing. Okay. So with that, the motion on the floor is whether or, do you have something to?
I just want to make sure that the motion clearly states when you are continuing the hearing to, because it needs to be continued, I believe, to a date certain.
Well, but we'll have to do that at the end of the evening because the comprehensive plan has already been continued till January 8th. So at the end of this testimony, we will have to continue this forward.
We're
So
working,
yeah,
working this through.
yeah,
It's-
that'll be the
yeah.
end of the evening when we make the continuance for the public testimony that's received tonight will be continued forward.
Okay, and you'll make that date known.
We'll make
at
that
the end of
date
the day.
certain, which will probably be the 15th.
Yeah, it's your prerogative.
Okay. So we'll do that though at the end of the evening. Thank you. So with Commissioner Babadi.
Real quick, three things. It's been brought to my attention by some people in the council, or, well, anyway, I'm not going to mention names, but the sense is that one of the reasons why this has been happening at this pace is there's a fear that the incoming council may not be as focused on this as the current council is. I don't know if that's true or not, but the reason I bring it up is I think everybody should be talking to everybody who's running for council and say this master plan and this zoning ordinance that we're looking at, if it doesn't get squeaked through before the election, you need to be in it to win it. That's part of the game. That's part of governing. Governing goes on whether or not you're in the council now or you're in the council later. We still have to be able to count on you. So I would encourage everybody to share that with the people that you are supporting out there that are running for office. The second thing is, if we are delaying this until the 8th, are we getting more time as a result of this? Does staff know if we get any time on the back end, or are we just compressing this further into the next year where the pressure goes up even higher?
So if I understand your question, you're asking about what implications tabling and
On the
continuing.
back end of it, what happens? Do we get, right, does this get more tense, or do we by default wind up getting more time to work this through?
I think it is based on your motion at the end of the proceedings in terms of when you propose to continue the text amendment discussion or this hearing too.
Okay.
So I think it's all a matter of what you decide this evening.
Okay. And the third thing is, are we going to be commenting on, are we as a body going to comment on zoning tonight?
We can, yes, that's the plan. So that after the public
After
weighs in,
comment, we're going to comment. Okay.
we are allowed to respond to comments we hear, have our own comments addressed, that sort of stuff.
Thank you.
But then everything with zoning would be put on hold until the
After
date
the-
that we continue it to at the end of this meeting.
Okay.
Does that
Thank
make
you.
sense to everybody? Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Jones, would you please call the roll? And again, the motion is whether or not to go to the 8th with the comprehensive plan and hear the comprehensive plan before any further discussion besides tonight occurs on zoning, the zoning ordinance itself. Correct? Okay. Ms. Jones, please call the roll.
Commissioner Halleck? Yes. Commissioner Johnson? Yes. Commissioner Mabadi?
Yes.
Commissioner Mangum?
Yes.
Commissioner Mudinchev?
Yes.
Commissioner Pucktell? Chair Rogers?
Yes. With 6 in favor and 1 opposed, the motion does carry. So that will be our action moving forward. Again, just for everybody in the room, we will hold testimony tonight on the stuff that was noticed for this evening, which is the districts and the zoning map. At this point, I'm going to ask staff to read those into the record. Do you have it?
I'm going to get a call from him.
Okay, the first item is a text amendment to the zoning code for Envision Evanston 2045, 24 PLND 0043. The city-initiated text amendment to the zoning ordinance, Title 6 of the City Code, to repeal Chapter 7, Zoning Districts and Map, Chapter 8, Residential Districts, Chapter 9, Business Districts, Chapter 10, Commercial Districts, Chapter 11, Downtown Districts, Chapter 12, Research Park District, Chapter 13, Transitional Manufacturing Districts, Chapter 14, Industrial Districts, and Chapter 15, Special Purpose and Overlay Districts. These chapters will be replaced with Chapter 3, Zoning Districts. The Land Use Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council, the determining body for this case, in accordance with Section 6346 of the Evanston Zoning Ordinance. We will also be hearing a map amendment for the official zoning map with Envision Evanston 2045, case number 24 PLND-0044, the city-initiated map amendment to the zoning ordinance Title 6 of the City Code to redistrict all properties within the city of Evanston. The new zoning map is part of the Envision Evanston 2045 and will remove all existing zoning and overlay districts and replace them with new districts. Interested parties can view the proposed map amendment at envisionevanston2045.com to review the proposed zoning for their parcel. The Land Use Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council, the determining body for this case, in accordance with Section 6346 of the Evanston zoning ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. At this point, I'm going to ask anybody who thinks they may be speaking to us, and I'm going to trust the people in the parasol room whom I cannot see but who can see me, to raise your right hand and be sworn at this time. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth throughout the course of these proceedings? Thank you, everyone. At this point, before we go into public comment, I'm going to ask Ms. Williams if she would like to make a brief presentation on what we'll be discussing this evening. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Liz Williams. I'm the planning manager for the City of Evanston. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present. So this evening, as was mentioned, we are reviewing Chapter 3, which is the proposed zoning district standards and then the official zoning map for the City of Evanston. So this process is really the result of community engagement, which has led to the draft comprehensive plan, vision, and goals. Staff did receive specific feedback from the commission and community members at your public hearing on November 20th. Thank you for that feedback. We are working to address the comments and considerations that you requested for your public hearing continuance on January 8th. We also continue to receive feedback online via survey and through community meetings held throughout December. And the comprehensive plan, as I mentioned, we're working on all of the responses to aid in your deliberations later in January. So zoning is one of the primary implementation tools of the comprehensive plan, and our current zoning code and map are being rewritten to help achieve the vision and goals of that plan. Current zoning is not aligned with the built environment here in Evanston and must adapt if we are going to achieve the goals that are laid out in the plan. Staff will present some data this evening that relates to the number of lots that are non-conforming for our current regulations. In addition to achieving the future vision and goals, the new zoning code should strive to align with our current built environment while also pushing us into the future to achieve that vision. So the proposed zoning map does reduce the number of districts and supports centers and corridor approach. Tonight's staff is seeking feedback on, as I mentioned, draft Chapter 3, zoning districts, and the zoning map. Your feedback, if possible, if we can kind of orient it towards, what is great or what do you like about the current proposal and what should not change, what needs to be adapted, or what alternatives the commission or the community would recommend based on what is drafted currently, and also what is missing so that that can be addressed for future conversations. So I wanted to quickly just talk about the comprehensive plan and the zoning map and how those interact with each other. The comprehensive plan includes a future land use map, which ultimately provides a high-level vision for how land should be managed over the next 20 years. So up on the screen, that is the map that is on the left, is the future land use map. Basically, that high-level vision for land management is used as a framework then to establish the underlying zoning districts, which are laid out on the map on the right. So the new zoning map is broken down into 17 districts, which are outlined up on the screen. Just generally speaking, the lower number for each district indicates the scale of development that is allowed. So for example, the R1 is the lowest intensity residential district, allowing up to 4 housing units, and R4 is the highest intensity residential zone, which allows multifamily housing. So the Envision Evanston team pulled together a summary of the number of parcels that are currently and proposed within each type of zoning category. You'll note that the biggest shifts are within the open space category because many of our smaller parks are currently zoned to mirror the surrounding residential zoning that they're located within. You'll also note that the downtown and mixed-use districts are also increasing slightly to further promote the centers and corridor approach. So looking at each district, we wanted to provide a little bit of a summary of how they're broken down and their intents, and then a little bit of data to dive in to the specifics. R1 and R2 are intended to allow 1 to 4 unit housing units. R3 intends to allow smaller scale multifamily buildings in addition to those single duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. R4 is intended to allow for multi-unit housing and also limited mixed uses, so some retail, commercial uses within those districts. All districts propose new lot size minimums, lot coverage, and building height standards. Just to give a little bit of perspective, currently about 89% of the parcels are zoned residential, so that's about 14,231. The proposed zoning map would decrease that slightly to 89% of the parcels proposed to be zoned residential. The major contributor of this, again, is where we see ETH or the high school that's currently zoned R4 and is proposed to shift to institutional campus. It's not working. If I could get a next slide. So this slide kind of looks at the current zoning districts, the residential districts, and how they conform as it relates to the minimum lot size. We've previously discussed how our current zoning results in a number of lots that are non-conforming to our district standards. So right now in the R1 single family zone, the minimum lot size is 7,200 square feet. But we have 49% of the parcels in that zone that do not meet that minimum lot size. So that's about half of the parcels in that district are non-conforming. And what this means is that our zoning is not calibrated to actually regulate what is built within that district. It is not aligning. It has been platted and it has smaller lots than that 7,200 square foot minimum. The proposed R1 new district proposes a minimum lot size of 6,500 square feet, and that does reduce the number of non-conforming lots. So that would mean that now only 40% of the lots within that district do not meet that standard. So you can see that comparison as we go across the board. And in general, what the new districts are accomplishing is more conformance when it comes to minimum lot size. I do think staff still believes there's room for refinement on the current lot size standards, and so is open to any feedback on alternative approaches of how we'd like to look at some of these district standards. Moving along, mixed-use districts are really intended to mix uses, including residential, retail, and commercial. So these are some of our coveted local business districts along Main Street, Dempster, and Central Street. And some of the changes in this area, again, the increasing building heights when you go from M1 to M3. And it also shifts from our current practice in some of these districts to look at lot coverage and institutes a floor area ratio approach. At this point, about 6% of parcels are currently zoned either business, commercial, office, or mixed use. And as a result of the new zoning map, that 6% of parcels would remain, but increase the number slightly. In terms of the downtown districts, the draft map proposes 3 new districts for that area. The downtown is Evanston's most densely populated neighborhood and does support urban mixed-use living. The D1 district is intended to maintain a pedestrian-oriented scale and strong orientation to the street. D2 is a mix of office, retail, and residential uses while providing transitions to the adjacent districts. So this would be around the kind of outside of the downtown core. And then D3 is the urban living, most dense district in the city of Evanston, and does call for a mix of outdoor gathering options, businesses, and currently high-rise development. As it relates to the number of parcels currently zoned within downtown and our research park zone, it's about 2% of our parcels, and that would remain the same within our proposed new zoning map. Moving right along to the university districts. These are, again, intended to support Northwestern University-related educational, recreational, administration, and research activities. The districts are broken down into 4 different categories. U1 is the transitional zone, essentially east of Sheridan Road, and the regulations call for where adjacent to residential, the scale of development reduces to provide a transition to those residential neighborhoods. The U2 is a district that essentially is along Elgin and Clark, just north of that area. It creates a bridge to the downtown, and again, where adjacent to residential, the scale of development must be reduced to provide a transition. The U3 district encompasses essentially Northwestern University's main campus, and then the U4 is the university-related sports facilities that also accommodate large assembly events. That is on Central Avenue where the current stadium is. So right now, 1% of parcels are currently zoned university or transitional. And after, or based on the proposed zoning map, 1% of parcels would remain within that district or those districts. And then we have some specialized districts. So this includes institutional campuses. These are for our hospitals and some of our senior living campuses, in addition to schools. We also have a creation and innovation district, which is replacing our industrial districts here in Evanston with a focus on technology and manufacturing. And then our open space zone. So this encompasses our lakefront and our current parks across the community. So in terms of just data here, again, institutional campus is a new district, so it makes up about 1% of the parcels. And currently we have about 1% of our parcels as industrial, and the proposed zoning map keeps that consistent. Same with the open space district. We've got about 1% of our parcels currently designated as open space. Where you see that increase in the proposed zoning, we did go through and capture existing tot lots, or as I mentioned earlier, those lots that are parkland but maintain the surrounding residential zoning designation. So with that, again, just want to mention that zoning supports, is intended to support our diverse land use needs, and also aims to achieve the vision and goals of the city's comprehensive plan. We are seeking feedback this evening and provided the structure just to help keep us organized, and have found that it's a good framing just to provide specific feedback. So with that, I'll turn it back to the commission, and thank you to the community for showing up this evening to provide public comment.
Before you step away, I wanted to make sure that I think there was an error in one of your slides, and I want to make sure it's an error and not a change to things. If you can go to the one where it showed the R1 through R6 that we currently have, this one, the R3 and R4, those aren't 3,500 square feet, are they? They're 4,500 square feet.
Proposed districts, is that correct?
proposed, so under the R3 and R4 there where we see the 3,500 square feet, the document that we were given with the text and the charts lists them as 4,500 square feet. And I just want to make sure that's the correct number.
It was an error on the slide.
Okay, I just wanted to
Yep.
make sure that something hadn't changed, which one was correct.
We'll make sure that we correct that before it gets posted online.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, thank you. Any really quick questions about anything? I don't want to go into detail, but not seeing any. We'll go ahead and begin with public testimony then. There are 46 people who have signed up this evening. Give me just a quick moment here to do some math. I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes this evening due to the number of speakers and the fact that this will be continued until later. So those of you who want to speak may, but in order to keep us not here all evening with that number of speakers, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to read off.
Can I make a comment on that? I'm sorry. Because I know that 3 minutes was what was published, or that's what's people no, not published.
Never been published.
People assume, based on the previous, that it's been 3 minutes. And I know that a lot of people could speak for 10 minutes, but they've condensed their speech to specifically 3 minutes, and they've practiced this. So now you saying that they can only have 2 minutes is a little bit not cool. So
I mean, if you want to stay all night, we can.
I don't
care.
And
I'll make a deal. I'll make a deal with everyone. We'll go to 3 minutes. And if someone has said something that's already been said, please don't repeat it. And I'll give everyone 3 minutes. So you will have your 3 minutes, but don't feel you have to use the entire 3 minute period. There's a quick question. Will you have a chance to make public comment at the next meeting? There will be public comment at all meetings. I'm sorry, what? Could you just come up real quick so we can pick up your question on the microphone? Thank you.
In the interest of time and in what we're talking about doing now, it might be better for some people to make comments on January 8th and pass.
And that's what people can do.
I mean, I would intend to pass tonight in the interest of time.
Okay.
Oh,
Yep.
Okay.
That's fine. So if you want to pass tonight, you also can do that. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with the people who signed up online. Again, I'm going to read off 4 names to allow time for people who are upstairs to get down if they want to. So my first 4 speakers are Carl Nystrom, Michael Lossoff, William Rice, and Robert Guritz. So, yep, please, Mr. Nystrom, if you want to start.
Yes, I'm just saying that I have opposition to a specific zoning for 819 Judson. The R4 zoning shown on the map shows no applicable limit to the coverage size for the lot. There's unlimited number of units on a multi-tenant building for a 50-foot wide lot. Currently, it's only a single-family 2-dwelling zoning. So what happens is we lose a lot of the front yard setback from the new construction that might go on there. There's a loss of open space from the building because the new zoning is only the new zoning allows for 3-foot setback on the sides, 10-foot setback in the front, and 10-foot setback in the back. This creates a large footprint. We'll be losing trees, natural habitat, green spaces, and open landscaping. I have a property that abuts this particular property. I would like lose sunlight and southern exposure, heating from the sun, and we also would lose our natural landscape view from our building if they build a building 65 feet tall with possibly 23 residents in it. The visual pollution and environmental pollution from the dense residential living in that area, including residential waste and recycling containers, would be next to my property. So this seems to be an intense zoning density for what is just a single house. So it seems to me like it's a big, increase in zoning. It would create dense traffic from property management services, construction contractors, delivery trucks, vehicles at the rear where my property butts the other property, city services. This increases hazards for me moving out of my driveway, visual obstructions from a new building that might be built there because, again, you're allowing a building to be built only 10 feet setback. The current zoning has a much longer setback, both in the front, the sides, and the rear. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Michael Lossoff, William Rice, Robert Guritz, and Gul Aga.
Need a taller stand here. William Rice, 2400 Lakewood Drive. Mayor Biss recently described the envisioned Evanston plan as transformational. I think he is right. The scope of change is enormous. He talked about the changes enabling the city to go from adding 250 to 500 new units added per year. If all the new units were built as triplexes on average on R1 land, it would mean 40% of all existing R1 homes would become multiplexes by 2045. Said differently, each resident in an R1 district should expect their home or neighbors to their left or to the right to be multiplex. I think there are a lot of problems with the plan. Worst of all, I believe affordability will actually get worse as supply takes decades to build and immaterial to the broader Chicagoland housing market, while these new laws introduce immediate demand with significantly deeper pockets. New homeowners will now have to compete with developers who will buy up lower cost homes that normally would be available as affordable units. This competition will push families seeking lower priced properties out of Evanston. Today, families don't have to compete with a developer when buying a home because it's not profitable to replace an existing home with a new one. Going forward, families will have to compete with bids from developers to convert single-family homes into multiplexes that don't serve large families. This competition is staggering. To hit Mayor Biss's target of an incremental 250 per year, developers would need to buy 35% of all homes sold in 2023. Most importantly, these new multiplexes are unlikely to be affordable, as we can already see new construction is very expensive. According to Redfin, no new construction, homes, townhomes, or condos have been sold for less than $600,000 since 2021, with an average well over $1 million. If the city provides incentives to make these units affordable, Evanston won't reap the additional tax revenue, but will be left with greater costs. To state the obvious, raising property taxes hurts affordability for all residents. Evanston has made tremendous progress in affordability over the last decade, especially in lower income cohorts. This progress will be put at risk, as we've seen in other cities that got rid of single-family zoning, like Minneapolis, that now face the highest tax rate increases in decades. Renters in Evanston are also at risk of seeing a step function increase in rents. In addition to the zoning change, the city has discussed getting rid of the 3 unrelated rule. Wards neighboring universities, such as the 7th, 5th, 1st, 8th, and 3rd, will see a significant increase in rents and gentrification, as families will have to compete with students who can all pay $1,000 to $1,500 per bedroom. In a Boston area study, areas that allowed large groups of students saw rents increase double digits. Home values in these areas actually decline due to disruption. There's a perception that local university students are less rowdy, but that is a symptom of the 3 unrelated rule. Visit similarly ranked schools in Ann Arbor, Berkeley, California, Durham, or Harvard, and you'll see the disruption. Most importantly, I don't believe residents want transformative change, and the city is trying to make these changes without a direct mandate. I've engaged with the city 3 times now, and I know countless others who have conveyed their view. The common thread I hear is families left Chicago to move to Evanston to escape the city's density and are concerned about these changes. Surveys and focus groups are all biased. I'll yield the rest of my time, but that was my comment.
All right, thank you. Michael Lossoff. Is Michael Lossoff in the room? Robert Guritz, Gul Aga, and Daniel Spiewak. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing names.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Robert Guritz, 736 Judson. 41 years in our house, 46 years in the neighborhood. We like the neighborhood the way it is. I want to make a comment about this process. I was reminded of the movie, I think it's Robin Hood with Errol Flynn, Little John rushes
Could you
up.
turn the microphone down? There you go.
Little John rushes up to Robin at some point and says, "We've got to do something." And Robin Hood said, "Why? Sometimes doing nothing is best." So I'm just curious about who is the godfather of this project. It sounds like it's more political than civic-minded. Now, I adopt what the other speakers have said. I'm not a zoning lawyer, but it seems to me in a typical zoning case, there's more due process. You have one property owner looking for a change, public notice is made, the local people, the most affected, get a chance to be represented and get down to the merits. This is being done with a broad brush. And I don't want a 4-flat next to my house. And I want you to consider some of the other implications. If my neighbor doesn't want to maintain his house, he doesn't have to, because he's going to sell it to a developer. And other people won't be able to compete with that developer, as the prior speaker said. Finally, we like the character of the city for the greenery, the parks, the lake, and we want it left alone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Gul Aga, followed by Daniel Spiewak, John Kennedy, and Jeff Smith. And I don't know if Mr. Smith is going to speak again or not.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the commission. I'm Gul Aga. I'm on the Evanston Environment Board, and I'm president of the Optima Views Condo Association. I'd like to comment on the sustainability aspects of this proposal. Climate change is real. The proposal gets rid of height restrictions and says there should be a lot of tall buildings in the draft plan in the downtown area. While the goal of density is good, tall buildings are environmentally unfriendly. And I have a document here that I'll share with you that summarizes the literature. A 20-story building has twice the carbon footprint of a 6-story building. This is because of solar loading, because of wind, the way the energy dissipates. It requires more steel because you're supporting a larger structure. A 20-story building has to support 210 floors. A 6-story building is 21 floors if you add up 1 to 6 or add up 1 to 20. If you add another floor, you're adding additional load. I did a study of the buildings in Evanston. As you know, there's a benchmarking ordinance that people file. 2019 was the last year that was available online in the open data portal. And I have a chart here, which you can see, which I will share with the staff, which shows how the taller buildings have twice the footprint. Now, in case of Evanston, 80%, according to city statistics, of the greenhouse gas emissions are from buildings. Nationally, buildings are 31%, according to the EPA. Private transportation is 20%. So it's a large chunk of the greenhouse gases. Tall buildings are a disaster. There are many vibrant cities around the world. Most cities have height restrictions. A city as vibrant as Paris has a height restriction. Ideally, you'd keep the height at 6 stories, but you could compromise up to 10 stories, but you're starting to increase the carbon footprint. We have to be responsible citizens and fight climate change. Height of the buildings does not help this process, and so I would urge any ordinance to put a height restriction. Let the development go to hubs on the different transportation hubs. We have many stations along the way for L, for Metra. There are many one-story buildings. You could go to 5, 6 stories. You can spread it out. It makes the space more livable. It doesn't create canyons. It doesn't create wind tunnels. And the electricity consumption is 1/2. The carbon footprint is 1/2. And so I'll share this write-up with the details. I have put some references from the open literature. I have done an analysis on the city data, and I urge you to take climate change seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Daniel Spiewak, John Kennedy, Jeff Smith, and Bruce Ennenbach.
All right, I will attempt to be concise. So I reside within what is present and futurely R1, and I want to comment on the revision of the limitation from single family up to duplex and triplex. I am greatly in favor of this change to the R1 zoning. I have no concerns about how this will change the neighborhood character or anything of that nature. I think there are many ways to justify why I believe that multi-unit housing is very, very important for Evanston and generally for the world, but climate change is an excellent example of them. But I'll confine myself to the property value impact and the necessity of ensuring affordable housing, sort of present and future within Evanston. The only way to achieve that is with a market-driven approach. And the only way to lower the price on things is to increase the supply. So generalizing to multi-unit housing, I feel, is extremely justified, and I'm very happy with this part of the proposal.
All right, thank you. If you could just state your name for the record.
My name is Daniel Spiewak.
Okay, thank you. Next up, I have John Kennedy, Jeff Smith, Bruce Ennenbach, and Kyle Navins.
Gentlemen and commissioners and ladies. I'm John Kennedy, 1119 Hinman. First, the story. We all moved to Evanston, or we stay in Evanston for some reason. A lot of it's due to the diversity. We have a diverse population, and it's healthy for our kids growing up. It's healthy for the community. Let's take a family on the west side. Generations have passed down that house. They're living now on property taxes. You know, that's what they're paying. They're not paying a mortgage. A developer walks in and says, I'll give you $400,000 tonight. Don't you think they'll take it? Won't those 4 new, $500,000 houses, townhouses, change the neighborhood? That's not why we moved here. Second thing, every resident in Evanston is being affected here. We have an election in April. There is no reason whatsoever that this shouldn't be an issue in the election. Do I want 4 houses squeezed into the house next door to me? No. That's not why I bought there. And I think we need to respect the electoral process, because this is a big issue. And it should be an issue in the elections. And I urge you to postpone any consideration of zoning until after the election. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Jeff Smith, who I believe told me earlier he was going to pass, Bruce Ennenbach, Kyle Navins, and John Metzger.
Since mine is so short, I decided to change my mind. Bruce Ennenbach, 723 Emerson. With respect to zoning, this Envision 2040, whatever it's called, proposal is blatantly written, but from a developer's point of view and not from the citizenry of Evanston. Our population has not grown significantly in the last 50 years, and we don't need to have it grow in the next 50 years. We've been full for a long time, and we're still full. This document assumes that we want to grow in population, that we want to increase our density, and that we want to have taller buildings and the like. All these assumptions are wrong. While there are a few that might subscribe to these assumptions, the vast majority does not. We are not interested in a more population growth. We are not interested in more increased density, and we are not interested in taller buildings. We do not aspire to be like the city of Chicago. The very basis of this document is flawed, and therefore anything emanating from it is without good foundation and should be thrown out. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Kyle Navins, John Metzger, Jerry Garl, and Wendy Pollock is after that.
Hey everyone, I'm Kyle Navins, 1720 Maple Avenue. we're new residents to Evanston. We just bought our first home here over the summer, and we couldn't be happier. Evanston is amazing, and we can imagine raising a family here. While looking for a home, we were kind of looking all over the suburbs. And there was one thing we knew we didn't want. We didn't want to move to the city. We didn't want to live in Chicago or downtown. And our fear with this new plan is that we're going to start looking like Chicago 2.0 and start to lose the Evanston identity that we all love and makes Evanston the best suburb of Chicago. I think we are headed in the right direction, but it does seem to be a bit fast and maybe not doing what's best for all of Evanston. I asked the council not to rush things and make sure they're doing what's best for Evanston and not the developers. Thank you for all your hard work and dedication in making Evanston the best city. Thank you.
Next up, I have John Metzger, followed by Jerry Garl, Wendy Pollock, and Sue Lolabach.
Thanks for hearing me. I live just west of the intersection of Crawford and Grosse Pointe and Central, which is maybe the most difficult intersection in the entire city. As you go west of there on Central, the north side has been left alone, but the south side has been rezoned on the map, and it's already very problematic. And you not only have the intersection of all those streets, but you also have Old Orchard Road that feeds in a half a block south of there, which adds to the difficult traffic. And it makes virtually no sense that the two sides of Central Street, the north side is left alone, but the south side is upzoned. It doesn't make any sense. I also have a question, and I noticed that there's a goal of increasing the density in Evanston and increasing the number of moderate income housing units. And I've never seen anywhere that said how much of Evanston is already Section 8 or otherwise moderate income, and I haven't seen what the target is. And I would love to hear answers to that. It's a question, not a comment. But and that's it. Thank you.
We don't have the answer to that, but we can direct staff to please find that information and provide it.
If you don't have a goal, then the point of doing the plan and the zoning is to achieve a goal. And if you don't even have a goal, it seems the cart's ahead of the horse.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Jerry Garl, Wendy Pollock, Sue Lolbach, and George Kripken.
Good evening. I'm Jerry Garl, 1607 Dobson Street. Thanks to the Land Use Commission for this opportunity. I am co-chair of Environmental Justice Evanston and wish to speak on that topic. Mitigating environmental justice requires taking proactive, corrective action in areas of our community that have been under-resourced for generations. The comprehensive plan and zoning codes must set standards and prioritize action to address long-term environmental injustices. Excuse me. For example, review of commercial industrial newly designated as creation and innovation zones adjacent to residential neighborhoods should include a critical look at the Church Street waste transfer station. Despite years of complaints about noise, odors, sickening air pollution from diesel truck traffic, and a potentially toxic trash fire in 2019, this facility continues to operate just feet from residents' homes. Does the land use represented by this facility reflect the city's commitment to mitigate environmental justice, or should changes in the zoning codes offer opportunities to significantly alter the recommended land use of this area? Zoning codes should not be applied with a broad brush, but reflect the history in Evanston that all neighborhoods have not been developed equitably. The results can be stark. Neighborhoods in the Fifth Ward and other disadvantaged areas have significantly less shading tree canopy, fewer green spaces, community gardens, and natural areas. The comprehensive plan and zoning codes should identify and restore the city's easements in residential areas to allow for more tree planting and to fill sidewalk gaps to increase walkability. The draft codes in Chapter 3 set varying limits on the maximum percentage of impervious surface coverings, 45% for R1, 60% for R2 and R3, and no limit at all for R4. There are also no limits at all on impervious surfaces for mixed use, downtown, university, or the so-called creation zone industrial zoning districts. These are real opportunities lost. Zoning standards in these areas should have greater provisions for tree planting within the city's parkway easement and higher restrictions for impervious surfaces to address these inequities. Critically, the comprehensive plan and new zoning codes must also incorporate methods and standards that work to avoid displacement of current residents. Large increases in property values inevitably result in displacement of those who can no longer afford to live in the community. The zoning code should account for and look for creative ways to support implementation of the city's anti-displacement policies, such as the Here to Stay initiative in the Fifth Ward and the City of Evanston's 10-year strategic housing plan, which includes multiple strategies to address displacement and gentrification. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Wendy Pollock, Sue Lulbach, George Kripken, and Mary Rosinski. Wendy's not here? Okay, thank you. Sue Lulbach, followed by George Kripken, Mary Rosinski, and Gail Kemp.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sue Lulbach. I work at Connections for the Homeless. And I want to say Connections served over 3,000 people last year. The majority of them were from Evanston. The majority were Black. Close to 40% of them had disabilities. The majority had incomes under $75,000 a year for their entire household. A third of them still had housing. They came to us because they were going to lose it. Compare these demographics to the demographics in this room, to the demographics upstairs, to the demographics on the dais. The majority may or may not be represented in this room. However, what we do know is that people of color, people with lower incomes are leaving Evanston. We're losing our diversity, and the character of our community includes poverty, segregation, and inequity. So we are very much in favor of these changes. They're not going to solve all of these problems, but they will make it possible to put in place many of the things that we know can work. So we urge you to really push for change because we really, really need it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my microphone wasn't on. Let me read those again. George Kripken, Mary Rosinski, Gail Kemp, and Michael Aubrey.
Hi, George Krupkin, 2425 Simpson. I live in the 7th Ward. I kind of want to speak to what Sue was saying before about the character of Evanston that I keep hearing people talk about. The character of Evanston that I was raised to believe in was one of diversity, inclusion, of not being like Wilmette and like all of the richer towns that you get in Kenilworth as you move further and further north. I was led to believe that the high school I went to and the students I was surrounded by were from various backgrounds, and that means that we have to change with the times. As Evanston gets more expensive, as other areas get more expensive, we have to change. Our character should be one that welcomes people into our community rather than saying, oh, I don't want you moving here. I don't want a 2-story unit next to my large home on Judson, you know, not to name names. I want to be proud to be from Evanston. I want to be proud that our community, that the place I've called home my whole life, is moving forward, is adjusting, and rather than kicking out residents in the 5th Ward who I've spoken to who have had 3rd, 4th, 5th generation families live here and now cannot afford to live here because it's becoming more expensive, I don't want to say that that's the place that I'm from. I don't want to be the place that I call home. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Mary Rosinski, Gail Kemp, Michael Aubrey, and Ray Friedman.
Hi, thank you very much. I want to say I do agree with most of the speakers who have spoken before, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this right and get the plan first, because this feels a little bit cart in front of the horse process. Typically, cities take 2 to 3 years to update their comprehensive plans and 3 to 4 years to totally rewrite their zoning ordinances. And for a meaningful process to happen, we need to allow for thoughtful public engagement, accurate drafts, feedback before and after consideration, and before it goes to council. Forcing residents to sacrifice their holiday season to meet an arbitrarily set deadline is unacceptable and will undoubtedly result in a poor, short-sighted, and end project. So you guys are very great. The proposed zoning changes are rooted in an admirable goal of creating affordable housing. However, as they stand, they will not achieve this goal, because true affordability requires intentional investment in affordable housing that remains accessible in perpetuity. Increasing density and relying on market forces will not lower housing costs. Simply, density and relying on market forces will not lower the costs, and the historical data from real estate crash of 2008 to 2013 demonstrates this. Even though the home prices fell due to restricted financing and other things going on in the market, the rents remained high despite the excess of housing supply. Market-driven density is not the answer. We need a plan. And this process is fundamentally flawed. Critical reports such as there's 4 reports I don't even know if you guys have seen or had read, but we have the strategic housing plan, and there's 3 reports in there. There's a diagnostic zoning report, and there's some 5-year housing plan. And I don't know how we can be talking and engaging the public if we all don't have access to the same report, because how do we integrate? We've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on consultants, so we need this. We cannot build a community on a shaky foundation. Our comprehensive plan and zoning are structural underpinnings of Evanston's future. And rushing now will only lead to costly corrections that are going to be needed later, socially and economically in the years ahead. Let's do it right. Let's do it right the first time. And let's not put the cart before the horse. This was a great zoning thing that I referred to many times in my business in real estate. And when people come into Evanston, it's the bulk zoning code. And I think we should have this in comparison to what the new codes are at, so that we residents can all look and say, okay, this is what the changes are, 35 feet, 23%, this. We shouldn't be having to go back and forth between the plan, this plan, and that plan, and this zone, and this zone. And we need height limits. We cannot have unlimited height, because we need the air, we need the green space, we need everything that makes a healthy community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Brzezinski. Next up, I have
Mr.
Gail.
Chair,
Yeah.
excuse me, can I just make a comment on that? Because, we're talking, I hope the staff is picking up all these things that people are asking for, because this comparison of what we have and what is proposed, everybody's been asking for that. And it's just too hard to research and do the comparison ourselves. And we've talked about this several times, and yet we don't have it. So if you guys could put it on your huge list of things to do. No.
All right, thank you. Gail Kemp, Michael Aubrey, Ray Friedman, and Alex Bond.
Thank you to the Commission for letting me speak tonight. My name is Gail Kemp. I live on Judson Avenue in Ward 3. I moved here recently in the last couple of years, to be near my daughter and her family who live here. I think that Evanston is a great place to live, and I'm loving it. I also want to say that I was fortunate enough to be able to buy my own condo when I sold my home, but I'm also fortunate to be able to walk and to use public transportation. What is really needed is affordable housing that allows regular working families to be able to have a home and to get to work and run errands using public transportation when they need it. My first concern is that zoning rules be changed to allow multi-unit use. There are many reasons for this, and the most odious reason for the current situation, even given the 1993 adjustments in zoning, were the practice of redlining in the last century. What we need to be able to do here, and what I hope we can do here, is that for people who live in single-family homes in R1 who have posted signs in the yard that say Black Lives Matter, I hope that they really mean that. The privilege that we and I, as a white person, have to live in the city and this society needs to be recognized. Then the next step needs to be taken to make sure that all of our residents who are also privileged to live in an affordable home with access to the great things that are happening in Evanston. So what can we do? First of all, I'm supportive of the current plan and the current map. But I think that a couple of things I want to point out in particular. One is that we need to understand what density housing really means and to have more 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units. I think that's been a lot of fear mongering here. If the percentages that the staff has spoken about with the changes in R1 are in fact implemented, I think that there's less chance of anybody being scared or running away from Evanston because of loss of whatever they deem important in their own living space. Secondly, I think what's important is that while recognizing 2, 3, and 4 unit houses, that we get rid of or minimize the minimum parking requirements. This is for a couple of reasons. One is the climate crisis is real and our earth is burning down. We have to stop using cars to get everywhere, and we have to make sure that mass housing, density housing, allows for the use of public transportation and parking only when necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michael Aubrey, followed by Ray Friedman, Alex Bond, and Dan Dubuie, I'm guessing is how it's pronounced.
Hi, my name is Michael Aubrey. Excuse me, I just ran up the stairs. My question concerns whether some of these zoning changes are changes in name only, or if they're changes in use designation. For example, I now live next or near to what is called the Creation and Innovation Zone, formerly industrial. I'm wondering how the new designation, if at all, will affect the adjoining neighborhood. For example, I live at 2127 Washington, a half a block east of the new Ox development. And that neighborhood is protected by a series of cul-de-sacs. Traffic cannot get through there coming from the east to the west. And I'm wondering if we are concerned about congestion, about parking, that development, the Ox, is essentially on an alley. We still don't understand how it's going to accommodate traffic, where people are going to park. And we're wondering if any of the cul-de-sacs are going to be compromised in the future to accommodate traffic. There's one where I live at Washington and Pittner, which is essentially a alley, a quasi-street, is now being used for access to the Ox. So we're wondering, concerned about how this new zoning and this sense of development is going to affect the quality of our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Ray Friedman, followed by Alex Bond, Dan Dubuie, and David Cook.
Hi, my name
just
is
a second. Mr. Cook? Okay, thank you.
My name is Alex Bond. I live 718 Dewey, and I have problem with parking. Across to me live rental standing, and I ask for parking permit, that's all. But I talked to this older woman, before was older man, nobody can help me. I come after 10 o'clock p.m. at home, my wife come after 10 p.m. at home, parking is full. I have to parking my car in 2-3 blocks. And when I call, they say zoning we cannot do it because all streets supposed to be signed it. But across all rentals, how is they gonna sign it? Today they live, tomorrow they not living here. Neighbor, he got single house, he got parking, and he got garage. My duplex. My neighbor, he got from alley, he parking his car in alley. No, in his place. I was one time attacked 2 years ago or 3 years ago. When I come at home, was maybe 12 o'clock, and I have to parking block in 3 hours, 3 blocks from my house. This I need help.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. This problem have a lot of people who got townhouses and duplexes. They have same problem.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cook, or Mr. Bond. Ray Friedman, Dan DeBuey, Elena Hemrick, and Joe Hill.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to comment on how interesting it was to attend last night's listening session on the downtown plan and possible zoning changes. I was really hoping to hear some feedback from Evanston officials that were present and the 3 aldermen that were hosting. After 2 hours of listening, there was no feedback from anyone. We need some dialogue from all public comments and meetings from the appropriate public officials that were addressed in those comments at all meetings. We have several serious issues to address in the next couple of years, and Evanston 2045 would not be on the top of my list. Sorry. Why are we rushing through this agenda to change the zoning districts, and amend the zoning ordinance? In my 9 years here in Evanston and speaking at most council meetings with little or no response at all, this lack of dialogue does not help anyone, nor does it make residents comfortable with decisions made without our knowledge or consent. Residents need to be involved in the discussion and process of all major decisions that affect all of our lives here in Evanston. What's the rush here to ram this agenda down our throats? What's the plan for City Hall, or plan for 909 Davis, or rebuild of Fountain Square? I still don't understand shutting down 3 8-unit buildings on Wesley and kicking out all those residents. Weren't all those units affordable housing? And why are we supporting a new Fifth Ward school when D65 is broke? We are giving them $200,000 of our tax dollars for a new track. Really? Our priorities here in Evanston seem to be totally misplaced. And 2 more questions. Who came up with the idea in the flyer that was floating around and addressed by Mayor Biss and a host of other community organizations that says bad zoning laws are why we can't have nice things? Really? Yeah. That makes no sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Last, do you really believe that more housing equals more affordability? I don't get it. Please slow down this process, and let's address the issues that need to be addressed now, before you create more aggravation for residents that we already have. We need data like Audrey Thompson has created, showing how useful the data is to prove your point or what needs to be done, instead of having more studies and more consultants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Next up, I have Dan DeBuey, Elena Hemrick, Joe Hill, and Jonathan. I can't make out the last name. I think it's Selton. Is Mr. DeBuey, and I may be pronouncing that name wrong. It looks like it's Debuey. I'll put him on hold for right now. Elena Himmerich.
Hi, my name is Elena Himmerich, address 829 Foster. I've come here to propose a use for the municipal building at 2221 Keeney. For context, I'm studying environmental engineering at Northwestern, and I'm in this class where we're doing an imaginary redesign of that whole commercial area. And of course, that's imaginary, but through researching that, I've learned about the comp, the CARP, and the property itself. I suggest that Evanston use this property for renewable energy generation for a few reasons. First of all, because, as other people have said, climate change is real and urgent, because the CARP goal is ambitious, and because this would provide a continuous revenue source for the city. This could also be done while allowing the other businesses within that warehouse to continue operation and complying with the draft zoning code. First of all, Evanston should put solar panels on top of that warehouse. From a quick calculation, I calculated that it could power about 35 homes a year. On the inside of the building, renewable generation could also happen too. About a mile away is the O'Brien Water Reclamation Plant, and they use a process called activated sludge to treat their wastewater. Now that process is very effective, but it generates a lot of waste sludge, and plants that use that process often have a lot of transportation costs to get rid of it. However, it can be a valuable resource if it is anaerobically digested to produce biogas, which is just renewably generated natural gas, methane, and also other valuable products. O'Brien plant would be economically incentivized to, instead of shipping it off all to wherever it has to go, to truck some of its waste sludge to Keeney, where Evanston can digest it into methane and any other products that might be needed to finance the operation. I suggest that natural gas be used to do combined heat and power for that building and surrounding buildings, because combined heat and power, CHP, is much more efficient than separate heat and power generation. Finally, for the parking lot on that site, I suggest that pervious paving be used, just like it is here in the parking lot at the Civic Center, as well as, if all that space does not need to be used for trucks and parking, to implement a bit of rain garden as well to further reduce flooding risk and promote biodiversity. I mean this as a starting point for the city. If and when anybody disagrees with anything I said, if and when there are hurdles to implementing it, I do not mean for the city to just scrap the entire idea of using this site for the CARP. Instead, I hope that the city iterates to make sure 2221 Keeney works for the community and for the climate. Thank you.
So I have Joe Hill, Jonathan, and again, I think it's Sellen, Patrick O'Connor, and Alan Turovitz.
Good evening. My name is Joe Hill. I live on Broadway in Evanston. This plan and its attendant zoning is not ready for prime time. The plan is designed to increase density, yet density is not defined in the plan as to how dense we want to be. The plan encourages growth, but does not define how big we want to be. Before we adopt a plan and zoning to make us bigger and more dense, we need to know where we want to end up. To adopt a plan designed to get us there, having no idea where there is nonsense. There is something to be said for becoming a mature community. A community may reach a certain size where it functions more effectively and efficiently. What is that size for Evanston? It's not noted in the plan. This zoning plan continues the destruction of zoning protections started with the approval of the Ryan Field project. It is a significant upzoning of all of Evanston and will not enhance the character or desirability of our neighborhoods or, in fact, the city itself. This plan and its zoning will change the city's character for generations to come, bringing us closer to our apparent goal of becoming a mini Chicago. There should be no rush to adopt this plan and zoning. We should take our time and get it right. It's too significant of a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. I have next up Jonathan, I think is it Selden? It's
Jonathan Selden.
Selden, I'm sorry. Patrick O'Connor, Alan Turovitz, and Peter Kelly.
Now that you got my name right, I just wanted to comment that I've heard a lot about what we don't like. We don't want this. We don't want that. We should take our time, and we don't need to rush this. This neighborhood character is going to be changed forever for the worst. This isn't about affordable housing. This is about the developers. Who do you guys think builds homes? Developers build homes. At one point, your home you live in was built by a developer. So this greedy agenda. Can we have silence from the peanut gallery, please? So this is a revolutionary transformational plan, and I think it is transformational. It's going to modernize Evanston to the 21st century, and it's going to look at data such as supply and demand, simple market forces that affect everybody. People want to keep things the same, but currently Evanston is very unaffordable. I don't know how many of you live on Forest already and live in a big old mansion, but I certainly don't, and I don't think many people who do live there can maintain these big properties. I want to say that I agree with the zoning plan. I think the R1 and R2 zoning plans are very good. I think the R3 should be expanded to anything east of Chicago. And we should look to expand our downtown more west on the west side of the train tracks so that there's more economic growth. But, I've heard a lot of gatekeeping, a lot of people who live here already who want to keep Evanston elderly, wealthy, and white, that ignore the fact that many who got to this place who were able to buy their homes when it was affordable, and then want to burn down the ladder behind them because they already achieved their house and their home values that they want, and to keep others who want to achieve this in the future from having that, affordability. Having more supply actually makes things more affordable, believe it or not. We've seen this during the pandemic when the demand for housing in places like San Francisco, Chicago, and New York plummeted, and people were able to get affordable leases. Now there's a high demand, especially for a place in Evanston. People want to live here for obvious reasons. It's an urban city. Not as urban as Chicago, but it's an urban city that has amenities. And people are drawn here because of these amenities, and we shouldn't be gatekeeping future Evanstonians from having this because you are personally against it because you're inconvenienced or don't want new people living next to you. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Selden. All right. Thank you. All right. I'm going to ask for silence, please. Next up, I have Patrick O'Connor, Alan Turovitz, Peter Kelly, and Dan Coyne.
Hi, good evening. Patrick O'Connor, 2753 Woodbine. I've lived at my home in Evanston for 27 years, and I couldn't be more opposed to what I see in this proposed zoning change here in Evanston. However, I've also been a real estate developer for 27 years, and I can't think of a bigger gift to the real estate developers of the world than this potential zoning change. So my comments tonight are with my developer's hat on. Right now, the R1 district in Evanston is fairly stable with minimal developer input. As soon as you increase the density and building type to allow up to fourplexes in the R1 district, you open the floodgates to the entire industry of developers who have one mandate in mind, and that's to make as much money as they possibly can. That's how development works. And the way they make money is by building as many big, expensive units as they possibly can, because developers make their money on margin, and there's a lot more margin in expensive real estate than there is in affordable real estate. There's nothing I see in this zoning proposal that speaks to affordability of housing. From what I can see, I see pockets of Evanston where developers will be getting $1,000 a square foot for condos. I also have a few questions. So I have to wonder where the city is getting its data from when we look at the current plan or the proposed plan. I see Envision Evanston laments the fact that Evanston home values have risen 18% over the last 5-year period, but there's no context for that provided. Nationally, the median home sales are up 32% in the last 5 years. Evanston is at a 14% advantage in terms of affordability compared to the national average. So what are we trying to achieve here? Since 2000, another comment, nationally, there has been a huge spike in the number of single-family homes that are owned by investors, and more recently by institutional investors. For example, currently in Atlanta, 25% of all single-family rental properties are owned by institutional investors. I have to ask, what percentage of single-family properties in Evanston are currently owned by investors, and what is the anticipated impact of this potential zoning change on the ownership of Evanston homes by institutional investors? Does Evanston have a target for its investor and institutionally owned residential properties? Envision Evanston highlights the need to conduct a housing needs assessment and other studies to determine the types and qualities of housing needed for Evanston's population. How can you rewrite the entire zoning code before you've done that? Lastly, as a real estate developer for almost 30 years, I've worked with municipalities and zoning professionals throughout Chicago, the suburbs, and across the country. I've never seen a zoning modification of this magnitude rushed through with such haphazard speed as the one before us now. I strongly encourage the city to slow down and consider the impacts on the people who call Evanston home and not just implement the recommendations of out-of-town consultants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Next up, I have Alan Turovitz, Peter Kelly, Dan Coyne, and Alf McConnell.
Thank you for giving me a chance to speak tonight. My name is Alan Turovitz. My wife and I live in the 6th Ward. We live in an area currently zoned as an R1 single-family residential area and near a very nice park, which is noted in the plan as an open space. The goal, according to the plan, is to provide affordable housing in all areas with a variety of options. It's hard to argue this goal. Real estate is expensive here as elsewhere. High prices make it challenging for many to afford a first home. Having said that, maximum density across the city without regard to the impact on current homeowners or to the city's infrastructure seems short-sighted. We may well be solving one set of problems and creating another set of problems. Parking will be an obvious challenge. Given limited transit alternatives on the north and west side of Evanston, people need to own cars. It's a reality now and for a long time to come. Street parking would also become a challenge, and the thought of walking a block or two in the snow to where you had to park is not a pleasant one. Trust me, I've been there. Transportation and parking are just two challenges of this increased density, but there are many more. Allowing more time to study the consequences of these changes seems like a reasonable request. My main point related to zoning, however, is the height structures approved for the R1 areas. The section of the report that includes in 6.3.3 includes a colorful illustration of what a typical R1 street would look like in the future after rezoning took effect. The multi-family units in this picture blend harmoniously with the surrounding homes and trees. However, one has to question whether this drawing was actually done to scale. According to the table in the section, the maximum building height is 35 feet. I have a tree in front of my yard that is roughly 40 feet, a little taller than the 35, but it hovers above my house, which measures 24 feet in height. A 35-foot structure would rise like a phoenix above all the homes on the average R1 block. To put it in perspective, let's say for argument's sake that I'm a 35-foot tall structure. A single-story home would only come up to my inseam over here, and a two-story home would only reach up to my belly button. I doubt that many in our community would be happy if one of these giants were built next to them, especially if they lived in a single-story home. My request is that we revisit the height requirements and also eliminate the fourplex option. This does not seem appropriate for low-impact housing in the R1, R2 zoning areas. My last, I think I'm almost running out of time, so I'll just hold back on the rest. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, I have Peter Kelly, followed by Dan Coyne, Alf McConnell, and Tricia Connolly.
The first part of my remarks are made unnecessary by your earlier actions. I'll simply say it's important that you hold the city responsible to act like a good applicant. You're being asked to do something extraordinary. You're supposed to act based on moving target. That's not good enough. I think you need to tell the city that they haven't satisfied the precise wording requirement of paragraph D1B of Appendix D that's made applicable by Ordinance 6344. And you should keep your record open until there's been a sufficient time after the city perfects its application by having final versions or near final versions. I know you give them grace, that's fine, but they really stretched it too much. On a related point, I think it's important to recognize you can't do your job properly unless you're in a position to insist on receiving the support from the city staff that that was committed to city council when the city council turned down the funding for additional staff support for the commission. You're being asked to act based on city staff. Well, hold their feet to the fire. Commissioner Menergich, excuse the pronunciation, as close as I can come, came up with a request, and I hope the city's working on it. He pointed out the 2020 census shows the city had 34,000 dwelling units and only 28,000 households. That 6% gap, about 18%. Does that mean that's a vacancy? Or does it really mean there's too few housing options of the type we need? Affordable options, starter homes, and empty nester homes. That brings another theme that this commission has shown some recognition of in its last meeting. To help visualize the impact of the proposal on downtown neighborhood, the staff should prepare a map of the downtown showing both the current and proposed D3 district. The proposed D3 zone will consist of all of current D3, almost all of current RP, and parts of current D2 and D4, and will have no explicit height limits. I submit this map will show the extent to which the city is recommending almost all of the downtown area will be in the D3 core that it proposed to be occupied by, quote, lots of tall buildings.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up, Mr. Kelly, please.
Okay. It may well be that some more density is desirable, but there are many alternatives and are more desirable than more tall buildings resembling landlocked Disney cruise ships. This downtown neighbors will have to do our part and burden shift with the rest of the city. Because the downtown is already the densest, that must include burden sharing, particularly along the corridors and centers. Thank you.
Thank you. My next speaker is Dan Coyne, followed by Alf McConnell, Tricia Connolly, and Carla Sutton.
I'm Dan Coyne. My wife Emily and I live at 827 Monroe in the 9th Ward. Chair Rogers and committee members and staff, thank you for your dedicated service. I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad you do. I do wear different hats in our community beyond just being a neighbor. I I am a board member with the Rotary Lighthouse Club here in town, where we try to raise money and give money away for our neighbors who are struggling with housing. I'm also a social worker with District 65 and work with a lot of homeless families and children that are suffering here in Evanston. I'm also a member of a Mennonite church called Reba Place Church on the south side. And I also serve as board president of Reba Place Development Corporation. I'm a developer of affordable housing. Most of my neighbors that are part of these different circles in my life believe very strongly that these revisions will help us as a community. And I affirm many of these changes. I do believe that the data will back us up, that the increase of more housing stock will stem the ever-increasing cost of living in Evanston. Even our friend Bill Smith agrees, which that says something. These zoning revisions will reduce the hurdles that our neighbors need to be able to afford to live next to us. We Mennonites at Reba Place Church began investing and building affordable housing in this community over 68 years ago. Although I won't be around 68 years from now, our organizations will be, and we will continue and we will get through this. It is my opinion that new development geared for mixed use will help us to remain diverse and economically vibrant. Why change, my neighbors ask, which is a fair question. Well, more housing stock equates to more property tax to fund our school districts. That's 80% of our taxes. That's where it goes. We need it. For instance, Tapestry and Albion, they're contributing over $1 million a year now to our taxes. That's huge. We heard a lot of horror stories, but now we've got great neighbors living in these different developments. Some of our good neighbors are asking, why change? Well, I think Darwin's theory of extinction kind of sums it up. We have to change. We have to work as a community through a democracy. We can disagree and peacefully change our zoning. And so I close with just thanking you for listening and being part of this.
Excuse me. Is your affordable housing that you've developed, is that subsidized?
I am on two different nonprofit affordable housing boards. One of them in Tinley Park is 100% HUD funding. And that's for people that are older, living in that community, about 105 units. The 300 living units that we have in this area, it's mixed. But it is all, pretty much affordable housing, but some of it is connected to tax programs, but most of it was privately done.
It's my experience, most affordable. If you want to make housing affordable, it needs to be subsidized. That's the only way.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate also that your earlier comment to try to delay this to have the community involved a bit more, because I do believe that is a sustainable model for us to go forward. But I would like to talk more with you if I could have an appointment with you at Firehouse Grill and over a beer or something, because I do want to challenge you a little bit on that theory. But thank you.
All right, thank you. My next speaker is Alf McConnell, Tricia Conley, Carla Sutton, and Paul Breslin. Alf McConnell, Tricia Conley, Carla Sutton, Paul Breslin, and Jeff Barini.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your deliberation about doing this in a way that makes sense. I think that's been a huge frustration for all of us. I'm here tonight to make public comment on behalf of the Board of Community Alliance for Better Government. The city has shared that they've had over 80 meetings about Envision Evanston. It's unknown where all these meetings have taken place, what wards were represented, and what demographics were representative of the meetings. This is unacceptable. This plan includes, as we know, a complete overhaul of our zoning in every neighborhood. and what we envision for our neighborhoods and downtown looking like the next 20 years. CABG believes unequivocally that a healthy Evanston is a fully diverse and inclusive Evanston by race and class. Everyone should have an opportunity to make or preserve their home in every neighborhood. Over the past 35 years, Evanston has been bleeding its low and moderate income residents. This has spilled over into significant population declines among people of color, especially our Black residents, hit with, on all sides, with the loss of low-cost rentals and homes through condo conversions and teardowns in the 90s and the foreclosure crisis in the 2000s. Combined with aggressive downtown high-rise development, Evanston is skewed wealthy and out of reach to middle and low-income families. To that end, the city should not approve new codes without first knowing the policies adopted will not have an unintended negative impact on low-income renters and homeowners, people of color, people with disabilities, and families with children. Experience has shown that a rising tide of development does not lift all boats. It only lifts the yachts of the wealthy. We're not interested in our elected officials' timetable on getting this done. We're interested in the people's timetable that should be prioritized here. We are asking you as commissioners to add your voice, to ask our elected officials to slow this down in order to hear from the people who have been ignored in sharing their vision for Evanston's future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Connolly. Next is Carla Sutton, Paul Breslin, Jeff Barini, and Darlene Cannon.
Good evening. Carla Sutton, 1821 Darrell Avenue, Evanston, Illinois. A resident of 1821 Darrell for 74 years. Unfortunately, I've come to this commission for the last 20 years, and all my petitions have been denied. It seems to me you have an unduly record of granting variances to any developer that comes in my community. And I've seen the devastation that you've done just in my one block in the 1800 block on Darrell. You took down 4 homes in the 1800 block on Darrell and put up 9 connective units. Each one of those units has a garage. None of the people who rent in these townhouses use their garage. So we have a serious parking problem. And lastly, our lots are pretty good size. One of the reasons we stayed in Evanston, so we could have our pets, our gardens, and family outings. Our average lot in that block is 35 feet wide by 150 feet. So you take down one house and you put up 9. You have to stop. Please leave my block alone. But in addition, I want to say, I thank you for this opportunity. I'd wish you would meet in every ward where every people and the persons who are adversely affected can come and look at these proposals and then give your opinion. Lastly, it appears to me that the proposals suggested by this city commission are neither on a trajectory to democratize access to capital for minorities, nor will they try in any scale to incentivize neighborhood mission-oriented projects that will align with community goals and priorities. Listen to us. We tell you what to do. You don't tell us what to do.
Paul Breslin, followed by Jeff Barini, Darlene Cannon, and Nancy Little, I believe is the last name.
Well, much of what I would have said, okay, I'm Paul Breslin, 1635 Hinman. I came to Evanston in 1976 as a Green Assistant Professor at Northwestern, retired in 2013 and stayed. I like living here. I don't live in a mansion. I live in a modest-sized condo on Hinman Avenue. I think the most serious objections apart from the railroading of the proposal and the lack of focus is the accusation that we're just resisting change because of privilege. If I believed that the changes made in this plan would ease the economic troubles of disadvantaged populations in this city, I would be for them, and I would be willing to sacrifice some of my privilege to get them. But I have heard from people better qualified than I am tonight that in practice the data does not show that these changes would do that. And I don't think that beating my breast as a guilty white person is a solution to any problems. I want the problem solved. I also would add, and this is not the Land Use Commission's fault, you've acted very honorably tonight, and I commend you for it. This is not the first time the citizens have been railroaded by this mayor and this city council. The 909 Davis thing, the violation of the Open Meetings Act, and a lot of closed-door discussion behind the Northwestern Stadium deal. So there is a history here of trying to ram things through without getting adequate citizen support. I would add, and you can pass this on to the council, I'll say it to them when I get a chance, some of the things that were done early in the process were insulting. In the first meeting about the 2045 plan, we were asked to stick little Post-it notes on a bulletin board. This is not a sixth grade class project. This is a very serious decision, you know. And the other night at a stakeholders meeting of relevant, wards close to downtown, we were asked, raise your hands if you object to higher buildings. Raise your hands if you don't. This is knee-jerk reaction. We haven't had time to think. I only got to read the proposal because Claire Kelly sent it to me, and I had 4 days to deal with this 118-page thing. And I would say that while the goals are hard to argue with, they are glittering generalities, and a lot of the ways to them aren't clear. Lastly, I noticed in the transportation map that there is a transportation desert west of where the high school is, between Dempster and Oakton. There is no bus line running through there, and that's where a lot of the most disadvantaged population is, and I don't see anything about a plan to fix that. So enough sanctimonious nonsense and more problem solving, please.
Thank you, Mr. Breslin. Next is Jeff Barini, Darlene Cannon, Nancy Little, and Bob Cole.
Great, thank you. Jeff Barini, 1800 Ridge. Thank you for your vote tonight. And it's a little more general perspective. The rule of unintended consequences is a concept that highlights how actions, particularly government policy decisions or interventions, can produce outcomes that are different from what was originally intended, often with unexpected and even opposite effects from those originally planned. Economists and social scientists recognize this rule, while politicians largely ignore it. The unintended consequences can generally be categorized into three categories. Positive, like the creation of Post-it notes. Negative, like the introduction of rabbits to Australia. And perverse, such as when a bounty placed on rats or snakes incentivizes residents to breed more rats and snakes. Understanding this rule promotes humility and caution when implementing significant changes, reminding us that complex systems often behave in ways that are not immediately predictable. The sociologist Robert Merton identified the typical causes of unintended consequences. First and foremost, ignorance and error. Another is called the immediacy of interest, in which an individual or group wants the intended consequences so much that they purposefully ignore any unintended effects. The rule of unintended consequences is especially relevant in fields like public policy, environmental management, economic regulation, and social engineering. To reduce potential unintended consequences, professionals are encouraged to conduct thorough impact assessments, consider multiple scenarios, implement monitoring and feedback mechanisms, remain flexible and prepared to adjust strategies, and acknowledge the complexity of interconnected systems. Regarding the city's proposed zone changes, most of these appear not to have been done. Revising our zoning code is a worthy exercise. The supposed deadline of April next year is self-imposed by the mayor and the city council. The mad rush to deregulate our zoning is rife with the potential for unintended consequences. I urge the city to slow this process down and be much more thoughtful. Barring that, it is you, the Land Use Commission, that can point out some of the potential unintended consequences that could occur. I wish you all the best with your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barini. Darlene Cannon, followed by Nancy Little, Bob Cole, and Olin Wilson Thomas.
Okay, thank you. Darlene Cannon, Second Ward. We hear a lot of people say that we want affordable housing, yet we don't have a land trust. So the affordable housing will sunshine after 15 years. And, if we really want to fix the problem, we'll have a land trust and it'll stay affordable until perpetuity. Moving forward, this plan is reckless when less than 96% of the residents have participated. Slow it down. We all know who gets harmed the most with public bodies when public bodies act irresponsibly. It's the lower and middle income folks that pay the biggest price. We are the ones who shoulder the bigger burdens of carelessness, acting claims to be residents, acting to claim that they're working in the best interests of residents. We see it over and over again in Evanston: inflated city and school budgets, no long-term planning, undisciplined spending, and lack of maintaining our buildings. It all comes down to the people's backs. And what ultimately happens is a continued exodus of Black residents, which I believe is a driving force for all of this. How about we spend some time developing a maintenance system so that we don't kick out low-income Black people off of Wesley? And though we say that, we cared about them, in the end, the city, along with the aldermen, allowed the building to be neglected. So that's all I have to say. Wesley residents' lives matter too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cannon. Nancy Little, followed by Bob Cole, Olin Wilson Thomas, and Robert Splendici, I'm guessing. I'm totally ruining that name, I know.
I'm Nancy Little. I live at 1214 Simpson Street in Evanston. Lived here a long time.
Could you move a little closer and pull the microphone down to you? You can pull that down so it's closer to you.
My name is Nancy Little. I live at 1214 Simpson. I've lived here for a long time. People have spoken before me and said very important things. I like it here because it's diversified. It has sky, it has trees, it has things that people can go to. I don't think this really was a plan that would get any kind of a mark in a business school. You got to know generally where you're going, and that you didn't even have. I came in here thinking, I got to tell you, you got to tell people what this is. The people have to vote on this, not the elected official. The people do, and they have to understand enough that's going on. Like, I am on this zone now, and that in this plan I will be on this zone, and then give them enough information so they can find out. Not a plan on a TV screen, which is too little, and you can't read all this stuff. It's complicated stuff, and intelligent, somebody that the voting population should have a knowledge of what's going on. I don't think there should be something going to every piece of property that says, this is what I was going to say, this is the zone now, this is what it's going to be, this is what the original zone means, and this is what the new one would be. But even if you can't get where you want to go, if you want diversity and all these things by the plan, anything that's been put before us. Anybody could, there's just not enough detail, let alone overall plan. And I'm not going to be here to see it, but I sure like Evanston to stay for the good parts and improve the bad parts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Little. Bob Cole. Olin Wilson Thomas, followed by Robert, and again, I'm sorry, I'm ruining this name. It looks like Splandishi, and Jim Slingo.
Good evening. My name is Olin Wilson Thomas, and I am a 9th Ward resident. Firstly, I'd like to address the claims by some members of public tonight that more density will lower their property values. This is unequivocally false, and I have data to back this up. A study by Northwestern Institute for Policy Research found that when you control for all other variables, a 10% increase in density in a Chicago suburb between 7.6 and 15 miles from the city center, as Evanston is, results in a 1% increase in the property values of nearby single-family homes, just by adding density. Density increases single-family home values and, simultaneously, adds affordable housing for those who want it. And let me be clear, just because higher density zoning may be approved where you live, that does not mean that an apartment complex will pop up the very next day. As many have pointed out tonight, the housing supply is market-driven, and if it remains that the majority of the demand for housing in Evanston is for single-family homes, then this will continue to be the majority of the housing supply in the city. Simple as that. Another thing I'd like to address is the notion that property taxes and zoning have nothing to do with each other. Both are often seen in a vacuum, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In one study by the planning firm Urban 3 of property tax data from Eugene, Oregon, they found that the only type of zoning that is a net drain on city finances is single-family zoning, and this isn't unique to Eugene. Per housing unit, single-family homes require more miles of water and sewage lines, more miles of paved roads, more fire stations, more electrical wires, and the list goes on. It's simply much more expensive to provide all these services to such a spread out area, and yet property taxes rarely reflect this. So what you typically have in cities is high density housing and retail, and pretty much everything else, subsidizing single family homeowners. Now this is not an attack on single family homes, but rather a statement of facts. So if residents want the tax rates to stop going up, they should be welcoming higher density, not opposing it. More density means more people to pay taxes and better public services. Third, a member of the public said that a 20-story building has twice the carbon footprint of a 6-story building. But if I have my numbers right, that means that the 20-story building actually has a lower carbon footprint per story than the 6-story building. Higher emissions from tall buildings don't always mean that those buildings are bad. Single-family homes will always be worse for the environment per person than higher density options. Increased density is one of the best things we can do to address the climate crisis today. But even with all these statistics, the likes of which the opposing side has failed to show, by the way, I can't convince anyone that doesn't have an open mind to the data and the facts. This zoning code is light years ahead of what so many cities are adopting, and I applaud the staff to put it on. Liz, she used to be here. Great job. So, to close, I find it unfortunate that so many people are putting so much time and energy into advocating for the continuation of the housing shortage in Evanston. The way I see it, Evanston is and always has been for everyone, regardless of their income or anything else, and I think our zoning code should make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson Thomas. Robert, and again, Spandishi, Jim Slingo. Followed by Brian Hansen and Richard Rostrom.
Hi, I'm Jim Slingo. I live the 3rd Ward, right over there by Chicago and South Boulevard. And zoning is important for property owners. They need to have a consistent idea of what they're going to expect, businesses especially. And I used to live over near Emerson and Foster, right by where Ward Manufacturing used to be. And they had to move because they converted that area to a big, beautiful condo building, which I wasn't against, but I was really glad they got them a nice property on Main Street, because Ward Manufacturing is one of the best businesses in Evanston. They bring in a lot of property taxes, jobs, and we can't afford to lose our industrial property. A lot of warehouses have been built recently, and they don't do too much of that in Evanston because we don't have the land for it, but most of these warehouses are going to wind up becoming industrial or entertainment or something, because there's no way they're going to use all that space. So we need to keep our industrial property open and available and not change the zoning on that so that we can compete, to get some of those jobs that some of the other towns are going to get and cities and so on. Even Chicago is maintaining their industrial area, even though they probably could make more money if they put up high rises there. So we ought to really pay attention to that. Someone mentioned about the affordability. We will lose the option of having diversity in Evanston if we allow this to turn into every property is 35 foot high and they all cost $800,000 per unit. I mean, people who couldn't afford to pay $800,000 for the single family home won't be able to pay $800,000 for their nice condo either. So, I mean, if you don't put in some limit, if you don't put in some, adjust the strategy and put in a height limit, maybe 3 units per lot. And then if it's going to be affordable, require that half the units built be affordable forever, not just for 15 years. I've been remodeling my place with solar to try to be as carbon neutral as possible, use electric heat and all that. It's not easy. It's expensive. But the point is, I do believe in doing things that are good for the environment. If we're going to change the zoning, then make sure that the zoning reflects that these new developments are done in an environmental way, where they'll use electric heat, for example, and they'll be more insulated and they'll use less resources. And then I mentioned pretty much everything, but a couple people mentioned how their neighborhoods have been messed up because of gentrification and the black people have to leave. That's wrong. I mean, if we want Evanston to be diverse, and I sure do, it should be for everybody. And bottom line is, take your time on the zoning. You're doing a good job, to try to do it. I think it's important, but don't rush it. Thank you so much.
Brian Hansen, followed by Richard Rostrom.
Hello, thanks very much. My name is Brian Hansen. I live at 3016 Normandy Place, where I've lived for 24 years with my family in a single-family home. I actually strongly support this set of proposals to change the zoning, including the proposed ending of single-family zoning and allowing 4 dwelling units by right. For me, this is about the character of our community and what kind of community we want. I think a lot of people have made the argument that they want to keep things the same. And I don't think that's really a choice that we have. Our community is going to go in one of 2 ways, and we need to make a decision. If we choose to keep zoning as it is now, we'll have a continued affordability crisis. We will continue to lose minority population. We will continue to have young families not be able to enter into Evanston. And we will end up with a community that is wealthier, whiter, and older. The alternative is to care about and make choices about the community that we want to live in that focuses not on maintaining housing stock like it is, but maintaining the diversity of the people who live in our community. And that is going to require more housing, different kinds of housing, so that people can afford to move into our community, so that people can afford to stay in our community. So the fundamental choice we have is not keeping things the same or changing. The choice is, what kind of change do we want? Do we want to maintain the buildings and change the people? Or do we want to maintain the diversity of our community and allow our building stock to evolve? For me, my family moved here because I wanted to live in a community that was socioeconomically, racially, and generationally diverse. That's still true. We looked at communities throughout the North Shore when we moved here, and we decided to come to Evanston because of that diversity. That is the character of the community that's most important to me, and that I think will be advanced with this proposal. And indeed, it's been referred to before, but Bill Smith's piece in Evanston Now shows that similar communities that have pursued this approach have actually lowered increases in housing costs significantly. And if you compare it to Evanston, it's very significant. I want our community to continue to be diverse, and I think this is a necessary step in order for that to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. The next speaker I have is Richard Rostrom, and then I'm going to run back through people who did not speak when I called their names. Is Richard Rostrom here? Not seeing that. Michael Lossoff. Dan Dubuie. Alf McConnell. Bob Cole. And that's it. Thank you to everybody who did show up and speak this evening. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. Robert Spendishi. Okay. Thank you to everyone who did show up this evening. We appreciate your input. It is vital, community input is vital in making this process move forward and making it be the community that everybody wants. And so we do appreciate your input. At this point, is everybody doing okay? Anybody need a little break? All good? Okay. At this point, we'll move to comments from commissioners, response from commissioners to what they've heard, and direction to staff on what we would like to see moving forward in the zones and districts area in particular. But of course, we had some speakers who spoke on other issues outside of that. If there's something else you heard that you would like to speak to, feel free. Commissioner Halleck, you want to kick us off?
I want to clarify something that Liz, I think, verified for me, and the people that have spoken about this R1, R2, R3 issue did not bring up, and it's a little strange to me that parking, the issue of parking, is in Chapter 5, which is disconnected from the discussion we're having now. But correct me if I'm wrong, but just to clarify things, the zoning for R1, R2, R3 that there is no parking required.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, that's the plan. No parking required, and I think that's significant.
It is, if I could, Commissioner, it is. There is no parking minimum required. The plan will be that new developments have to contemplate transportation demand as it relates to their development.
Right. I understand.
And if it is indicated in that transportation demand plan that parking is required to meet the transportation demand for that development, the requirement is that they will have to provide that parking.
But this is as of right, so who reviews that?
Staff reviews that. And there is a process and there are criteria for reviewing those proposals.
I guess the point I'm making too is that depending on the size of the lot, but if it's a 35-foot lot, you're not going to fit, if you put a 4-flat on that, you're not going to fit parking on the site unless you have tandem parking. So the parking is going to go on the street. And I think that's a major factor that people aren't aware of.
One thing to note about the proposed district standards is that there is an exemption for lot coverage standards related to parking. So there is a exemption from the lot standards that would accommodate up to 480 square feet of parking on a site and would not count towards the overall lot coverage standards.
Yeah, I'm not even addressing that. I'm just saying physically it's going to be hard to park and, on it. I just draw the plan and I could draw the plan and show you, but I just want to make that point. Everybody has talked about the need for more time, and I think that's been beat to death. And I'm really glad that we're focusing on the comprehensive plan first, which is and if that delays the process, then so be it. The clarification I want to make into my own opinion on this is that I personally am not against building buildings of higher density. It's just a matter of where. I found it interesting that the plan talks about the emphasis on centers and corridors. That's what the concept for the new plan was supposed to do. And I agree, centers and corridors, those transportation centers, main corridors, Central Street, Emerson, those are main corridors. Those are the places, in my opinion, for flats or bigger buildings. I mean, not tall buildings, but more density, but not across the board. And what the objection I have to this whole plan is that it's very broad brush. It's if it said, okay, along Central Street, we can have higher density, I think you'd get a much better response than saying everywhere, well, we can provide 4 flats. We can have four flats. So it's not, to me at least, it's not about the issue of more multifamily, more density, more diversity. I'm for all those things. It's just a matter of where, and I think this plan is, I've said this before, is more like no zoning. It's just sort of, everywhere we can do this instead of selected streets or selected centers, as the comprehensive plan is talked about.
Commissioner Mabadi.
So I have a few questions.
If I could just interrupt for a second, I do want us to kind of focus in on the changes that the staff is asking for with those 3 questions up there. What's great and should not change, what needs to be adapted, and what's missing.
Thank you. The existing lot size requirements that are currently on book for R1, 2, and 3, 7,200 square feet is the minimum lot size. For R3, a 2-family requires 3,500 square foot per dwelling unit. So if you were building, say, a 2-unit building, you need 7,000. 4, 14,000. And what I'm looking at here, maybe I missed it, but I'm not seeing any per unit lot size requirement in the existing proposed code. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct. The type of development that can go on the site would be dictated by the use table.
Okay, so then a 6,500 square foot lot, theoretically, someone could put 4 units on.
As currently drafted, correct.
Okay, so I'm really uncomfortable with that. I'm really uncomfortable with the idea of putting anything more than 2 units in our current R1 area. And if you look at the city, it's the product of 150 years of tinkering with the code. So you have neighborhoods where you have, side-by-side duplexes and single-family residences, and then flats, and then a bunch of houses, and those work harmoniously, and they happen to be fine. But the concern here is when you start pulling down the square footage requirements and opening up the unit count requirement, it completely changes the rhythm of these neighborhoods in ways that I feel would be detrimental to the value of the properties, which are critical for why people come here and what we do in terms of raising our tax revenue as defined by the values of these properties. So if you're saying you want to create affordability, I feel like you could literally have land for free and still not build affordably because of the sheer cost of new construction. I think affordability and density should be completely uncoupled and discussed separately. And I think that if we want to change, then we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this change? And if you want to add density in an existing area that's not dense, a pure R1, there's an argument that can be made that we need to increase some space for people to come and live. If you want to create affordability, there's no argument that suggests that except maybe an accessory dwelling unit that might be built. But even that, I was looking at a couple of them that were under construction. There's no way that someone's going to rent those things at 60% of medium, 80% of medium, unless they're doing it for pure altruistic reasons. I mean, the cost of making this stuff is so enormous that there's no economic argument to do it unless you're going to rent it at market. And so I think if we want as a community to embrace affordability, then that's a standalone issue. That's a thing that we need to say. We need to raise money. We need to have land banking. We need to be doing things like working with the federal government if there ever is going to be one in a few years. But we have to do something other than try to tinker with the code to create more units where the units are already being created and are already expensive. You can't go backwards. You want to go forwards. So that's why I don't think doing much more than changing R1 to accommodating 2 units, it would be a workable change that we already are visually seeing in our communities. It's everywhere. You can look anywhere. You can go on Park, you can go on Darrow, you can go on Judson, you can go on Grove. You can find them everywhere that you have blocks where there are single families and duplexes or 2-flats. It's in abundance. So, and lastly, if we want to increase affordable housing, focus on existing envelopes that are there that are not being used. Basement apartments that were torn out because of regulatory reasons that are in apartments all over the place. That's a lot cheaper and a lot of units that you could add without spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a unit to create. So that's a different point that was off a little bit. But that's what I think. I think we need to focus on more narrowly scoping our change.
Can I ask one question for clarification?
Yeah.
You mentioned that you felt that 2 units under the current 6,500 square foot standard would be what you would feel comfortable with. If perhaps an alternative proposal were to be presented that would increase that lot size requirement to accommodate the additional units, is that something that the commission would be open to wanting to explore?
Well, I can only speak for myself, and I think that my discomfort with the density of unit production isn't directly related to the lot size. It's directed to the unit production, and it's out of order with the rest of with that block, the area that is already currently R1. So you're making a dramatic change, and I also am not convinced that the economics, the idea that it's going to be affordable, if this is the magic bullet for affordability, I don't believe it at all.
One other clarifying question. You mentioned the basement apartments that are currently have either been deconverted or are existing and perhaps not legally existing. Is that something that you would like staff to explore, providing an option for if a unit is added within an existing building envelope, that would be permitted under the existing zoning because it does not change the built form of the project or of the property?
Yes.
So that is something you are open to?
Absolutely. I think, and I can give you streets where there are buildings that are like that. I can give you literally addresses of buildings that are like that. And I actually owned a few of them over the years where I got inspected and they came and said, that's not a legal apartment. Take the kitchen out. So I said, I bought it. It was rented. They said, take the kitchen out. So we took it out. And that was affordable housing. It was an $800 2-bedroom apartment. It's a long time ago, but it was affordable then. So they exist.
Thank you. I just appreciate it as we move forward. I think if we can think about alternatives to the concerns that are being raised, that's really productive and helpful for staff.
Can I ask a quick question here? You talked about the 6,500 square feet if we were to increase that. Do we have an idea as to how many of our properties are in that 6,000, 7,000 plus that are currently R1, R2, R3 type properties?
We do have that data. If we can maybe just continue
we'll continue to
comments
talk.
and then
Yep,
we'll come back to it. Yep.
I just want to clarify so I'm responding appropriately. You're looking at within the 4 proposed zoning districts of R1 through R4.
So the question came up about the R1 district. If we were to bump that 6,500 back up to the 7,200, how many properties are we talking about? Are we talking about 100 properties? Are we talking about 300 properties? And I don't need an answer right now, but that's something to, as we continue that discussion, to look into.
And you're interested in that for R1?
Well,
what would the number be for the
question
others?
is
Because they're not one-to-one. That's just I want to make sure.
Yeah, the question basically is in response to what Ms. Williams asked Commissioner Mabadi about, would you feel more comfortable saying that a 4 flat could go on something if we bump that up to 7,200 square feet? What are we talking about? Are we talking about, again, 100
Thank you.
properties, 300 properties, what?
So I have one more. So for 3 and 4 unit buildings, I would say 3 and 4 unit buildings should be separately zoned, like have its own designation. Like if R1 was 1 and 2 units, then R2 could be 3 and 4, in my view. And then I think you want to go above 4. I think you have a different, another. I mean, I just feel like the code that we have right now isn't that bad for the apartment unit count and lot size. I don't think it's that bad. I mean, it works. So, but if we want to make the lots smaller to endorse more density for new plotting of land in the future, wherever that's going to be, then this is fine. But I would have the above 4 units in a different category than it is right now, because looks like you have 2 categories that would apply to, and in the current code you have 4, because R4 and R4A and R5 and R6 you can build more than 4 units. R3 theoretically you could build more than 4 units, but you'd have a very wide lot. It'd be like a townhome thing. So.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Puctel, do you want to go next, or?
Sure.
I can skip you if you'd like, if you want more time.
No, I'll go. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have some general comments. I feel.
Mine is, sorry.
Sorry. I think it's reasonable that as a city we're somewhere in between the feel of Chicago and the feel of Wilmette. It's kind of what makes Evanston unique in a lot of ways, that we're somewhere in between those two things, trying to maintain that, hold on to one or think we're completely turning to the other. I don't think your microphone has It was on. And I think that the proposals are reasonable. I live in the 8th Ward. I live on a block with single-family homes, 3 flats, apartment buildings, all mixed together. It's great. And I don't find that the kinds of like language tonight I find a little disturbing about kind of the fears of that kind of mixture. I think I think the proposals are not, and I think we're not being too extreme either. I think we're not talking about abolishing the zoning. We're not talking about abolishing, willy-nilly. And we are being consistent in trying to apply these kinds of changes everywhere. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's appropriate that if we have progressive zoning reform goals, that it only applies to certain areas of the city, or we need to start slicing it up to different parts of the city. That's not right. And I think that and I think my last comment is that the term affordable, I think, is being confused a bit this evening. I didn't read anything in the plan that talked about the formal definition of affordable housing. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a mix of housing types that, by definition, create different price points for people. I think that's the goal. So let's be clear about that too. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Miranchov?
I will start with a question to staff, and it may sound a little bit strange, but usually when we make significant urban planning and some other master planning, comprehensive plan, we have somewhere along the way an independent consultant that reviews everything and makes a report. Shall we have one?
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this. So beyond the consultant team that has been hired to prepare this report, you're asking, should there be another outside audit of what is being prepared?
Exactly.
I don't think that it's something that has been contemplated thus far, but, it's, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, from my perspective. And, I would also offer that there's cost implications to doing so.
Of course.
Yep.
I'm asking because usually such a review or report finds things that could be improved and makes recommendations that are usually a kind of a mandatory, because things, we can find things. So I'll go back to the zoning and the things I mentioned at the start this evening. I tried to go through all the zoning districts and everything that was published, and I was trying to even model some properties, what could be done on a property and how the new zoning will affect it. I will kind of mix this with some of the residents that mentioned that it will be nice if, for instance, what we have here, this table, if we have similar about the current, so that everybody could compare whether for his own district or for anyone, what this table means. I will say that generally, several of the main zoning parameters are kind of raised up in all districts. And I'm talking about impervious surface, building footprint, height. So most of the new districts, the percentage of all these things is higher. And one of the things, and that's why I asked also very, very long ago about some modeling what will happen. Some of my results were surprising, and I would say in the negative way. Because if we have a 6,500 lot, for instance, R1, and we are inside all the parameters of the new zoning, with the setbacks, with the building coverage, having in mind the garage allowance, 480 square feet, having in mind everything that you fit without variances. We can have a building inside that is between 110 and 70 feet long or deep. And this is 5 feet from a property line. So this is worst case scenario, but it is a significant change in how these zoning districts will look like, with the possibility of really, incoherent buildings all over. And the other thing that confused me, current zoning has two measurements for building height. One is the absolute and one is the mean height, especially for buildings with sloped roofs, which is most common in these zonings. The new zoning does not have absolute building height. It has only mean height. Once again, I speak for buildings with sloped roofs. This makes the building even higher. And this, once again, will be really, I would say, unfortunate for the architectural view, let's call it, of these residential districts. And I'm talking R1 to R4. So that's why I was hoping that we can have a little bit deeper understanding, and I would say modeling some scenarios, what could happen with a residential lot, different size, different width, because we have all the variety, and how this will affect neighbors, because we risk that we have really not very pleasant happenings between neighbors. So all this concerns me. And I'm talking currently about R1 to R4 because this is what was most the discussion. But similar things happen in other districts. And once again, I didn't have the time to go through everything. But starting with these, which are most controversial, let's call it, and going through the others, I would love to have more and deeper understanding of what happens over there. And this will affect many other things. Thank you.
I just want to reinforce this because I think this is a great idea and it's going to take time, and we should have the time, because what everybody out there, all of us including, are reacting to the numbers, but the physical interpretation of those numbers is what matters. And when you compare a flat roofed 35-foot building to a 2-story house, it's a major difference, as an example. And so I think, and then the size of the lot and all these other issues, which what the problem is not a problem, but what we're suggesting here is that this new zoning is as of right. So it's not that, these projects are going to be submitted to us and we get to look at the physicalness of the proposal. We won't. It'll be as of right. So I think it's important to understand in the zoning analysis what the physical could be. I just want to reinforce that.
Yeah, and staff is actively working on the visualization and the 3D modeling associated with the new district standards. So that is something that, as we move forward, will hopefully aid in your deliberations. So thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First off, the map on page 10, is it exactly the same as the map on page 14 in our packet? It's the two proposed zoning maps.
There's only one zoning map, so.
So you're looking, I think, at the future land.
You're looking at the future land use map, which is part of the comprehensive plan. And then the zoning map is the more detailed version of how each of those areas. I think it's a little confusing because the city of Evanston currently doesn't have a future land use map. And so this is new. And, we're happy to do some more briefings on the differences between the two. But land use, again, is, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it's your high level 20-year plan for how land will be designated. And then the zoning districts goes into more detail underlying that future land use map.
Okay, but in the document 12.4, 2024 memo for LUC, I have on page, it's on page 10, there's a proposed zoning map. And then I scroll down to page 14. It's another proposed zoning map. It says draft zoning map 11.19.2024 at the top.
Those are the same.
They are the same.
Those are the exact same. It's not like one is 11.19.2024 and another one's a different date.
One is in the memo, and then the other one is an attachment to the memo. So I think that's where the confusion is coming into play. Sorry about this.
Those two zoning maps.
Those are
exact
identical.
Same zoning map. Because I was piecing through those and saying, what square is different?
Our attempts to provide information in the memo, I think, confuse people. So sorry for that.
Got it. Thank you. I thought I was.
I'm glad we worked through that.
Okay. Okay. Another question. I saw that the overlay districts are going away, and strictly speaking, are historic districts considered overlay districts?
No, historic districts are completely separate and are regulated by the preservation ordinance, which is outside of the zoning ordinance. So that is not on the table to be changed. I know at the last meeting there was some concerns about historic districts and historic properties. Those regulations are not changing. They're staying in place. So any new construction within those historic districts would have to go and be reviewed by the Preservation Commission, and receive a certificate of appropriateness that they fit the context of the neighborhood. In addition, any demolitions within those particular districts also need to go through that process before demolition could occur. In addition to the fact that if it's also outside of a district, but it recognized as a landmarked property, those same regulations would still apply under these proposed changes. So no changes to historic designations.
Okay, that's what I figured. They were not overlay districts, but on the old, the current existing zoning map, those historic districts do appear.
Yep.
Was there an active decision to not put them for information's sake on the proposed zoning map?
I think it is just in an attempt not to confuse an already kind of, dense process in how we navigate, and talk about future land use map and zoning. It's just another added layer that isn't necessary at this time. We can always produce maps once it's adopted, the official zoning map is adopted, that show where those districts are across the community. And we also can produce it if it's an interest from the commission to see where those districts are.
Yeah, and I bring it up because in our last meeting, we had some of the public feedback talked about the history of the development of Evanston and a city, I don't know, known as the City of Homes. And I found it very illustrative to look at the existing zoning map and see where the historic districts are. And I noticed that they, are largely R1 districts. And so the, preservation of the character of the built environment in those places really played into this discussion last week and this week about R1. I mean, we heard a lot about R1. So I was constantly with the proposed zoning map looking back, where are these historic districts in reference to preserving the character of the built environment in those places, which I do think would be harmed by putting up to 4 units on R1, the new R1 zone places throughout the city. I increased density, as far as achieving different goals of the plan. I mean, I can support that. And if, I've voted for, multifamily buildings, I've voted for increased development on a number of projects here in locations where it seemed appropriate, the centers and corridors, where the infrastructure supports it. But looking widely across the city to open up all R1 areas to 4 units, I don't see that as a good idea. And the questions that you had up there, things that were good, things to change, I would advocate for changing that. The R1 areas, and many of them are far from transit. We hear a lot about parking. Where people are going to park, how do we locate parking on those properties? We haven't heard too much about it tonight, but we've heard about concerns about impervious surface coverage. And in my neighborhood, the trend tends to be people tearing down 1-car garages, replacing them with the city mandated 2-car garage, and there has been an increase in flooding. I hear from my neighbors, water in their basements, adding more impervious surfaces. And I see that would be something that would be accelerated by having additional density in these R1 zones. So I have concerns along those lines. In addition to this, preserving kind of historic character of some of areas of Evanston, having a diversity of housing types, including single-family detached homes, I think is something that we should maintain. One of the great things about Evanston, one of the things that attracted me to my neighborhood is that there are a wide variety of sized houses. There's some big houses, medium houses, small houses, and I'm concerned that, and mine is one of the small houses, and I'm concerned about a developer coming to, coming in and saying, hey, I'd like to buy your house, build a floor flat here. Because I see the economics of this kind of pointing in that direction if the 4 units are allowed, by right throughout the R1 districts. Question about, increasing density throughout the city. How does this plan interface with the city's provisions for ADUs?
So the provisions for ADUs would remain pretty much similar to how we currently permit them across to the city. I think there is in the draft, though, contemplating a slight increase in the size of an accessory dwelling unit. Those chapters are set to be released, in the coming days now, depending on what you decide for future hearings, that may shift. But just, wanted to put that out there that they're predominantly the same as currently established.
Because I think that, a good compromise would be, and I've, hearing the feedback from the people that came to this meeting and the people that wrote in our comment packet, I think a good compromise would be to remain with the R1 designation having, single family detached home with an allowable AD unit if there's space for it. So we get 2 units in those areas and then increased residential density in other parts of the city. But I think that would further some of the goals of the plan without causing too much of negative impact to those areas. So strictly to answer your question, what should change or what needs to change, I would advocate for keeping R1 as single-family detached homes with the ADU if it's permissible on that particular property, and that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. I'm going to circle back on your comments about impervious surface coverage and the changes, just so that we can clarify. So proposed R1 is made up of the existing R1 and R2 district predominantly that currently exists within the city. R1 proposes an impervious surface coverage of 45% and a building lot coverage of 35%. R1 existing has a impervious surface coverage maximum of 45, so the proposal does not change impervious surface coverage in the R1 district. And the building lot coverage in the existing R1 is 30, so there is a slight increase of 5% there. R2 existing is 55% impervious lot coverage, so in those areas, actually, we are reducing the impervious lot surface coverage in that district with the proposal. And then the building lot coverage is 40%, so which is also going down. Just to clarify, I think you made a statement earlier that we were increasing the impervious surface coverage allowed in the R1 district. That's not the case.
And thank you for being cognizant and sensitive to that.
Commissioner Mangum.
I think someone mentioned it earlier about the comparison charts. It would be helpful to have like a comparison chart with what is the current zoning, what is the proposed change, so that we can better answer the questions. Also, I know that the proposed changes impact all wards, but I'm concerned that it could have a negative impact on certain wards. For example, the 5th ward. Land is cheaper in the 5th ward and maybe some other wards around Evanston. So developers will probably more likely buy up land there versus going to the lakefront and buying up land and creating, multifamily dwellings there. So I think in drafting the plan, we have to consider that and maybe, as Commissioner Mobadi mentioned earlier, increasing the lot size or square footage and that kind of thing, and maybe limiting where these changes could take place so that there is less of a negative impact.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
So, Liz, I have a question. for a simple single-family house in the R1 district, how do we come up to 6,500 square feet? What was the argument that we went from 72 to 65? Is that just arbitrary or?
No, I think it's an attempt, as mentioned, to try to make more of the existing lots within that district conforming to the district standards. So right now we have over 50% of the lots. 49% of the lots are smaller than the minimum lot size. So you have 49% of the lots don't conform. So the thought process here is trying to reduce that lot size so that more lots are conforming, that don't trigger relief, the requirement to come through for variations from you all when people want to make improvements to their homes. And it also recognizes that our built environment is not aligned with our current district standards. The other thing that came into consideration is not wanting to reduce that lot size too small, because we do have larger lots that then could subdivide and would alter the built fabric of the neighborhood more drastically than I think what is being proposed currently. So it's a balancing act when you start to look at that. And that's part of why I was asking earlier, would it be amenable to the commission to want to see scenarios or data, at least to explore the idea of allowing up to 4 units if you had a larger lot within these districts, but then that would minimize the realization of how many of those could actually be built.
So, but the way that this is written, as proposed, in order to, maybe there's a different question, because I'm not familiar with this. If you have a non-conforming lot right now, 25-foot, 28-foot wide lot, 30-foot, can you build on it?
Yes, but it depends. It might trigger the need for relief from setbacks or other types of provisions. So, yes, you could, but again, there are limitations that come into play.
It would come before this body then?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Well, that I wanted to ask about that, because there's no mention in the zoning about allowed uses. And then
It's in a section that has not been released yet.
oh, okay. And then are you going to have special uses also?
Yes,
And the special uses or variations would come before us always?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Other than the minor variations that are administratively reviewed as we currently practice today in our code.
so like to the point of, I'm sorry, I forget your Commissioner K. Call it that. To this point about modeling. I mean, if you look at what you have right now, you have a total of 52 feet of setback, R1, front and back, and a lot coverage of 35%, which equates to, if you wanted to put a 2,000-foot house, a 1,000-foot plate, 2,000-foot house. So if you had 5-foot setback, side yard setbacks, you're at a 25 by 40-foot building lot coverage. You're at 1,000 feet. So if you divided that out by 35%, you're around 2,900 square feet. 2,900 square feet divided by 35 is slightly under 90 feet. And you could, at 100 or 110 feet, if you added these together, you'd have 40 plus 20, 52, 92 feet. You could have a 92-foot wide lot, deep lot with a 35-foot wide, 35 by 9, I'm tired, I've been up since 5, but call it 100. But this requires almost 200. Because if you're at 6,500 square feet and 35-foot width, in order for this lot to be as of right, without having to come to get relief, you're looking at a deep lot, a deeper than normal lot. So this kind of definition, it kind of moves outside of the typical lot length for a property that's 35 feet wide. So maybe we need to be modeling, to the point of modeling, maybe we need to be looking at, do we need to have R1 to be at 65? Maybe we only need to be if it's a minimum of 35 feet, maybe 5,000 will do it, you know?
Yeah. And I think staff has, explored those alternatives, where 5,000 feet could potentially even realize more conforming lots, and then potentially tiering to increase the lot size minimum to allow more than, a duplex or triplex or fourplex or something like that. So I want to follow up on a couple of things here from staff.
Good evening, Sam Hubbard, a senior planner and interim zoning administrator. I think you bring up a great point, and we are working on some of the modeling. The challenge we also run into is that there's such a diversity of lot sizes and depths that, you could have a neighborhood that's full of 132-foot deep lots. You could have neighborhoods that are even, deeper, but you're also going to have certain neighborhoods that have lots that are like 90 feet. So it's, without some of these allowances for, greater or lesser setbacks, then on those less deep lots, now you're not allowing any type of redevelopment there. You're basically preventing them from some of the allowances and development potential that some of these other lots have. So,
I'm just looking at the setbacks. If you just follow the setbacks and you use a median house size, you could come up with a minimal lot size based upon. Do you follow what I mean?
Right. The all of the restrictions that are all of the bulk standards, setbacks, FAR.
Yeah.
That if you have a larger lot of a certain size, you can fit a lot on there. But when you have a smaller lot that has constrained dimensions, you're really not able to realize some of the development potential. So, like Ms. Williams mentioned, it's a really difficult balancing act, and that's all I'm trying to say, is that we're trying to balance all of these so that all of the different lot sizes can have some sort of benefit here from redevelopment potentials. But we can't just look at the deep lots. We also have to look at the shallow lots and make sure that they're able to.
I don't think you understand. I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is that when you have setbacks, there's only so much. If you have a lot coverage, and in other words, you want to be able to accommodate on a small lot. You want to put a 6,000-foot house on a 3,000-foot lot. You have setbacks, so you have front and rear setbacks. So it's already discouraging, appropriately discouraging, the oversizing of a house with the setbacks that are in place, regardless of whether it's 50 or 350 feet deep. It's got these setbacks that are limiters for like what you can do. So if you look at your setbacks, your front and rear and side setbacks, you can come up with an idea that you're not going to, you can argue for a smaller lot size without harming the larger properties. They'll dissolve themselves by an architect will design for the client to fit the lot. It's not gonna, there's nothing in the code that's going to stop that. But it's about making more land available to develop without coming to this body and going through a grind to get that done. I'm just trying to think of it in terms of simplification and expediency.
For the record, Uri Proctor, a senior housing planner. I just wanted to follow up with Commissioner Chair Rogers' question around the percentage. We can obviously run numbers for any scenario, but just wanted to follow up. So you had asked before around R1, and the current proposal at 6,500 square feet puts approximately 40% below. And then if we were to change that back to 7,200, it would be about 50% would be below, which would be close to 700 parcels that fit into that category. So just wanted to provide that.
So basically it puts us back to the number roughly where we are. So that what that's telling me is that by reducing it, we're reducing it in order to try to bring more into conformity as opposed to anything else.
Yes, and I want to add, I think I'm understanding what Commissioner Mabadi was saying, but relatedly, the piece we're speaking to on this slide is just the conformity around lot size. There's obviously other conformities, and so the development potential on various parcels, even let's say R1 at 6,500 for lot size, many of them couldn't see 4 units or 3 units, potentially couldn't even see 2 units because of the setbacks. And staff and consultants aren't proposing to drastically change those in R1. So one thing that, as we move along also in addition to modeling, can look at and provide a better understanding of how many of those parcels could see what's allowed by right in the district, but not allowed in that one scenario, because I presume you'd have one might have a different feeling if 90% of the parcels could see four units versus 10%, then it's a little more theoretical versus imminent.
Well, I'm just hoping that we do cap it at 2, so then this is all, it all works out.
All right. I'm going to make a few comments. And one of the things I want to focus on is we've spent a lot of time talking about R1 in particular, but there are 13 other districts out there. And so, what? Right. No. So I kind of want to focus in on a few of those, and I'm going to kind of work a little bit backwards, I think. But before I go to that, I do want to just kind of follow up on the discussion we were having about reducing size. I think we have to be careful about reducing our minimum lot size too much, because there are 10,000 square foot lots in the city of Evanston, which are ripe for subdivision and then redevelopment with twice the number of units. So you're putting 8 units. So I'm very happy keeping it kind of where we are and not reducing it too much more, because I don't want to see a bunch of lots divided up. Yes, there will be some that can be still, because I know there are some lots that are over 20,000 square feet. But that's one thing. Kind of working backwards a little bit here through the various districts, I think it makes sense to use the open space to bring all of our parks and make sure that all of our parks are labeled and they aren't labeled as residential. So that does make sense, because that's one of the things that we're looking at trying to do. That's one of the things we keep hearing in the comp plan about trying to give people places outside of their homes, to give them green space, to develop our urban forest, I guess we would call it, even though lots of it's not forest. But it is having that green space out there. The creation and innovation, which is replacing our industrial, I'd like staff to speak a little bit about that. We have very little industrial districts in the city. Most of them are carryovers from existing industrial from years past. Lots of them are along old train lines, that sort of stuff, major routes. Do we feel that by removing industrial, we are taking away opportunities for things to happen in the city of Evanston? And I understand that we don't want some industrial uses necessarily, but I think that can be applied through our uses and what is special use and what is permitted by right. And my understanding of the Creation and Innovation District is that we're kind of leading into the research and lab and those types of developments. But is there a benefit to keeping some of our current industrial uses in those areas and kind of keeping that land in reserve and not putting it aside for something else? And then when people are looking for industrial uses, light industry, it won't be heavy industry, I don't think.
I think the use table will clarify for you, Chair Rogers, around the types of uses that are allowed within that district. I think it's more trying to brand them.
Okay, that's
the
fine.
district
That's fine, 'cause
as
we're missing
creation
pieces
and
of things
innovation, as opposed to the traditional zoning designation of industrial.
Right.
I think that industry in and of itself is going to evolve significantly over the next 20 years, and the goal is to be adaptable so that we can address and help support whatever emerging industries may want to locate here in Evanston. So it's not doing away with the types of uses that could currently locate within those districts. It's branding.
In regard to the institutional district, I know that we're grouping places like Presbyterian homes with the hospitals, with the schools. What is why would we classify what is something that is basically a residential institution under the same category as things that are used for, I'm going to call it transient purposes, schools, hospitals, things like that?
I think it's more so in the sense that they have long-term programming plans for these types of uses. Most of these campuses have master plans where they're thinking about future development and the things that they would like to realize. They're also trying to adapt to emerging trends. And so the other similarity is just the types of emerging activities within, the hospital industry. In addition to some of our senior living facilities, we've had conversations around housing needs related to both of those and the changing, desires of folks that live within senior living facilities here in Evanston. And so, because they are developed as a campus with kind of consistent programming, I think that's the logic behind it, is that they have specific needs that do tend to align, although, they have different impacts. I would say the hospital and senior living also see a lot of ambulance traffic. So that's one thing in terms of consistent land use impacts related to the two uses. But again, I think it more relates to the fact that of future programming and it's a campus environment.
Okay. I want to talk briefly about university districts. So we have 4 university districts, which comprise 1% of our property, which is 96 to 101 units, depending upon where we are in the chart there. In looking at, we have our residential and mixed use, which is residential at some level as well, which comprise about 95% of our properties, some roughly 15,000. Do we feel that we are, or what is the rationale behind subdividing the university so much while keeping our housing grouped into bigger categories?
I think it more relates to the geography and the transitions with adjacent districts around the university. So it would be difficult to have uniform zoning for, let's say, the athletic campus area as compared to other districts in the university. And I think that the current kind of makeup of the different university districts is also trying to emulate our existing approach and being sensitive to the fact that the university does abut residential neighborhoods and needing to have more prescriptive standards to mitigate any conflicts in land uses there.
When I'm looking at like the U1 district, and I mean, I'm kind of looking at the map, and if memory is serving me correctly, that involves like the Willard House stretch of properties there that are all the old homes that have been repurposed into university buildings. They really mimic residential for a lot of how they're built, their built structure and everything. But we created a special district. Is that just because of future issues? Is it because of a different use, more intense use?
Yeah, I think the across the Sheridan Street is significantly more densely built. The types of structures, the size, the scale, just the lot sizes in general are significantly different when you go west of Sheridan. I do think it it relates to future programming needs of the university, and it also tries to balance that with what we hear about increasing the land that the university does commandeer. So if they're not able to develop for the programming that they are intending to do in the future on their existing campus lots that could open up risk for them purchasing and taking additional land within Evanston off the tax roll. So it's a balancing act to try to support future programming of the university and allow that to happen within the current boundaries of their existing land holdings.
But wouldn't it restrict it further if we were to zone that residential?
I think it is also related to the uses. Okay. You know, they're not residential uses. They're
but not
being
everything
used
in every
as
one of our residential districts is a residential use.
Yes, but if you change and convert that to residential zoning, that means that those uses, those university uses, could go anywhere in any of those residential districts. And so I think that's a concern we've heard, is the expansion of how much land the university is occupying outside of what they currently own.
Okay. All right. Kind of moving into downtown, what was the thinking behind having no building height in our D3? I realize that's where we want the most height because we sort of tier our way up to the downtown. But we go from 65, 135 to anything as long as you hit the FAR.
Yep. And I think the FAR is where the height is controlled. There is a cap associated when you have a floor area ratio requirement for a district. And so, you know, someone could choose to build that entire lot line to lot line and realize a 9-story building under the current proposed provisions, or they could dedicate half of that lot and realize a taller building. And so again, it's that flexibility in terms of what could be developed where. And in chapters that have been released related to procedures and administration, there are also triggers for planned developments if you go over a certain height in that district. So it is not intended that by right development above 150 feet could occur without having the Land Use Commission and ultimately City Council say yes to the project.
Okay. Then kind of moving into the mixed use and residential, which I'm going to kind of group together because they kind of flow in and out of each other regularly. We have our business districts, which are kind of our mixed use with our storefronts, businesses, and the housing above and that sort of stuff. We have everything across the board is 4,500 square feet. Is that kind of where we are in most of our business districts?
We have not run the analysis on those particular lots to answer your question this evening.
If we could kind of get that in, kind of like we have here,
yep.
Maybe if that would help speak to those things. And then the one thing that I also noticed here is we have FARs across the board for our mixed use, but we also bleed FAR into our R4. Is it typical to have FARs in our residential districts?
This is new. So this is transitioning to an FAR approach. And I think this comes into play just based on the existing built form within a lot of those, that district already. And recognizing that we have a lot of different styles of development that occurs, and the FAR approach is one that I think is a little more conducive to allowing that variation in the type of development.
Okay, and I'm going to speak on R4 for just a moment because I live in an what will become an R4 district. I'm currently, I think, R5 or R6. I kind of modeled my property, which the odds of my property being torn down are minimal. It is a 3.5-story courtyard building, typical Chicago courtyard building. But if my building were to burn down or fall down or something like that, that always opens it up. We don't have we aren't dealing with impervious surfaces and building lot coverages on these properties anymore. We're also decreasing setbacks on these properties. and increasing height. Now, I realize that those things kind of play off each other, that, you know, you can build taller, but you can't build as wide, et cetera, et cetera. But even with that, just a rough analysis on my building, we could add an extra story and close off our courtyard and potentially move 10 feet closer to the street. That is a big change in that neighborhood, which is typically these 3.5-story courtyard buildings. We have some 2 flats in the area. There's some single-family homes nearby. It seems to me that we kind of have a large jump from going from our R1, R2, R3, and then it's kind of like every other residential property all of a sudden. And I'm not saying we have to go into this type of mode where we have 7 different districts for residential. But it seems to me that we have R1 and R2 are very closely related to each other. R3 is a little bit of a distant cousin. And then we have R4, which is just kind of a catch-all for everything else. And I'm wondering if that's the best approach. If there should be, I don't want to create additional zoning codes, but we did it for the university, which is why I ask about it. If we were to create an additional district in there that recognizes those differences, and in looking at where they are on the map, a lot of that R4 is falling into those neighborhoods that are Chicago-like, I'll call it. And so do we really want to just go beyond that and build more density in those particular neighborhoods that are on small streets, you know, small one-way streets in many cases, and a number of cases. So I'm just kind of a little leery about that one, that we've really focused a lot on R1 and R2, and I get it. Those are the properties that are most likely to be impacted by this. And I share Commissioner Mangum's concern about like 5th Ward, 2nd Ward, parts of the 9th and 8th potentially, where you have land that is less expensive. You have demolition costs that are less expensive. If you're tearing down a wood frame home versus a masonry home. So when developers do come looking for places to develop, I think those are the areas that are going to be hit the hardest. And I think we have to be prepared for that and know how, as a city, if that's what we want to do, how we respond to that. I'm very much in favor of an expansion of R1. I believe 2 flats are acceptable. I don't think they make sense financially, probably in most areas, to tear down a single family home and build a 2 flat. Some places it might. And I think we should make that option available to people. But I just have real concerns about where our most vulnerable people are located. And those are the people that will be most vulnerable to a redevelopment. Let's see if there's anything else I wrote down here. I think those are a lot of my notes. Yeah, I think that covers off on most of my things. I hope I've given you some suggestions, as well as, I feel like we pick things apart a lot, but it's because we're looking for the things that don't make sense, and we kind of gloss over the things that do make sense, or that aren't controversial or aren't problematic. And I think that this discussion will bear more fruit as we see Chapter 5 come out, because at the bottom of almost every one of these it says, see Chapter 5 for more details, which is great, but we haven't seen Chapter 5, so we don't know what those more details are yet.
Understood.
And some of this might make more sense then. Some of it might need more tweaking then, based on that, because my understanding is that there are landscaping requirements that would take away some of the concerns I have on the property, that, you know, my property, as I was talking about it, because I don't know that we would meet the minimums if we built it the way I suggested we build it. But without knowing what those numbers are exactly, it's hard to gauge that. So that's what I have to say. I don't know if there's anything else anybody else on the commission has that they'd like to add, or anything for any of the other districts that we kind of talked about a little bit, but.
Yeah, I have one question about the lot width for R4. Again, I'm curious, what was the reasoning that we had no designated lot width? You relying on the floor area ratio to answer that? Because like in the existing code, you have a lot width requirement for R5, R6, I think it's 60 feet. And it was, at one point, it was 50 feet, but you guys had it changed in part because of there was some issues about underground parking and not having a proper turning radius, so the lots were widened slightly in order to build, you had to have a 60-foot wide lot, whereas a 50, you could look at examples of that, like there was a building that was built on Prairie, that was a condo building on a 50-foot wide lot that can't be built now because it's too narrow and because they couldn't create the appropriate turning radius for the underground parking. So now you have no lot width requirements, and I'm thinking about like how that works. Are we going to have no parking requirements then? So, ooh, that's not good. Yeah.
Chapter 5 is so significant.
Right.
Because it needs to be applied.
Yeah.
It needs to be applied to all these zoning, and then these kinds of problems are going to show up.
I don't want this to come across as defensive at all. So please don't take it this way.
I promise.
The reason why we were trying to break up the chapters the way we did is because we recognize that this is a lot of information. And so in an attempt to keep you all focused on specific pieces of this zoning ordinance, we are releasing it in sections so that you focus on specifically what is in front of you, and provide feedback on that instead of having a lot of moving conversations around all of this. And I totally respect where you're coming from, Commissioner.
We can multitask really well.
I know. And this comes back to, the chairs and staff's conversations about how do we break this up in bite-sized pieces for you all to try to digest. So again, I hear you. And we always also anticipated that this would come back in January, which now we're going to talk about when this will come back. And I think there was at that point a second opportunity for the commission to look at this as one unified piece before having to go into your deliberations and making a recommendation. So there was some thought put into why it's been broken up, but I totally respect where you're coming from in terms of it being challenging when they are interconnected.
They're trying to manage you, George.
Does staff have anything else that they want to ask or respond to comments you've heard from us?
No, just thank you again. I think this has been a really productive conversation in terms of providing feedback and suggested alternatives, because that's what this is all about. It's great to say you don't like something, but it's really important to say what would make it better, so that we can have the best possible outcome as we move through this process. I would say as you contemplate how you're going to motion to continue these two items based on the motion earlier in the evening, I would also recommend that at this point you make a motion to cancel both the December 11th and December 18th meetings, and we will renotice and continue based on whatever decision you make on deferring and continuing this particular text amendment and the map amendment.
Okay, before we get into that discussion, I'm going to, with the board's permission, flip our communications and public comment, because I have the feeling our communications is going to be a little bit of that discussion about when we'll be coming back and everything. But I want to make sure if anybody has any public comment that they want to make to us on any other issue, that they can do that now. Yes. If you could come up to the microphone, please, just so they can hear your question.
Just had some leftover comments that I would like to submit to the staff.
If you hand them to staff, staff will make sure that we get a copy of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing anyone else. We'll move into what the communications, which will kind of be our discussion. I don't think I have to until the very end of the meeting. I haven't closed public comment yet for the hearing. No, I haven't yet because I want to have this discussion before we continue. So finding out, so if kind of looking at this, January 8th is when we're planning to look at a comp plan tweaked again. How much time do commissioners feel needs to be put into that discussion? Because when we look at continuing this, I don't want to continue it too early, but I also don't want to continue it way late either.
I think my opinion is that when we discussed the comp plan, we had a lot of comments, and assuming that everybody took good notes and that there aren't any questions for us or any issues that you're not sure what we were intending, then it could be done in one session, I think. I mean, optimistically, but it sort of depends on that.
Because we still will not be voting on it. Yeah, it would not be voted on. We will vote on these together. So there would not be a vote on January 8th, if that makes sense to me.
Why wouldn't we vote on it?
Because I think as we move through the zoning ordinance, there may be tweaks and changes into the comp plan. And if we've voted on a comp plan, then we've already made our recommendation.
I think as long as we have consensus, we don't have to have a vote, but consensus about the comp plan, I think that accomplishes the same thing.
Okay, yeah, I think so too. You're looking at me with a look.
I'm just confused, I guess. So are you talking about still wanting to vote on the comp plan and the zoning text amendment at the same time? Because I thought the earlier motion was to get the comp plan, a recommendation on the comp plan, and then take up the zoning text amendment again.
No, that was the motion, but I'm just saying that we could change that if there's an issue to just a sort of a informal consensus.
We can do that. It's just that as we're changing all of these things at the same time, there's going to be overlap.
Yeah, I get it.
And so I don't want us to recommend something.
No, they'd have to go back. Yeah.
Let's just have an informal consensus and then a vote together. Does that make sense?
Let's just take a brief little 5-minute recess here so I can have a conversation off the record with staff. All right, we're going to go back on the record. So just to clarify, I've talked with staff. What we're going to do moving forward is we have continued the comp plan until the January 8th meeting, which was done at our last meeting. So we will discuss the comp plan based on tweaks and changes that have been provided by us that give staff a couple weeks to work on it. And then we will return on the 15th to deliberate and vote on that, on the comp plan. That means that the zoning ordinance that we've discussed this evening and all future iterations of that will occur on January 22nd, which is the following Wednesday. So I'm going to ask for a couple motions here. The first motion is going to be to continue public testimony on the zoning ordinance, which is what we've heard this evening, to January 22nd. And the map amendment is included in that as well. I'm sorry.
I'd like to make a motion that we continue discussions of the zoning ordinance, the map amendment to January 22nd.
All right. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. And is there any further discussion? That still makes our final vote on at least part of this on the 15th, which we already checked dates for everybody. Nope, because we don't have to do a motion for that. The second motion that I need is to cancel our meetings that were scheduled for December 11th and December 18th, since we will not be discussing the zoning ordinance because we have now continued that till January.
Can we vote on the first motion first?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Yes. Would you call the roll on the first motion? Thank you.
We're in a rush.
All right. Commissioner Halleck,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mabadi,
Yes.
Commissioner Mangum,
Yes.
Commissioner Woodinchev,
Yes.
Commissioner Pucktell,
Yes.
Chair Rogers.
Yes, with 7 voting in favor and none voting against, the zoning ordinance and map ordinance discussion is continued until January 22nd, 2025. Now I will ask if there is a motion to cancel our meetings on December 11th and December 18th.
I move to cancel our meetings on December 11th and 18th.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Halleck, seconded by Commissioner Pucktell. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none. Ms. Jones, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Halleck, Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mabadi,
Yes.
Commissioner Mangum,
Yes.
Commissioner Woodinchev,
Yes.
Commissioner Pucktell,
Yes.
Chair Rogers.
Yes, with 7 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries. And those 2 meetings have been canceled, and staff will take the appropriate notice to cancel those meetings and announce what's happening moving forward. Anything else staff has for us? Not seeing anything. I'll ask if there is a motion to adjourn. From somebody?
I move to adjourn.
It's been moved by Commissioner Pucktell. Is there a
Second.
Second by Commissioner Mangum, I think. All in favor, please say aye.
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 We do stand adjourned until January 8th. Will be our next meeting of the Land Use Commission here in council chambers, and that will be at 6 o'clock? At 6 o'clock.